Chapter 11122, Racing Across Tokyo to Save You. Kasumigaoka Shiyu's doubts churned inside her like sand in a whirlwind. She stood aboard the spacecraft, eyes lingering on the jewel-encrusted throne where Ethan sat. Her heart fluttered with unease. The ship's design was audacious to the point of recklessness. Beyond the throne, meticulously carved and reinforced, every other surface of the vessel lay bare, exposed to the void without so much as a protective hull. Could such a structure survive high-speed flight, let alone the fierce wind currents or storms it might encounter? Shiyu bit her lip, swallowing her questions. The scene before her transcended her imagination. Then, almost imperceptibly, the ship trembled as if cradled by some unseen force. Golden light flared across its exterior, gentle yet powerful, spreading like dawn's first rays. In moments, the entire craft was bathed in that radiant glow, as though draped in a veil of pure, celestial brilliance. Shiyu exhaled. Whatever this ship was, it was far more than she had ever dreamed, and it was carrying Ethan toward Tokyo, toward the peril that awaited, and, she hoped, to the rescue she so desperately longed to make. A soft, radiant glow spilled into every corner of the spacecraft, as if quietly proclaiming some long-hidden secret to the universe. At Ethan's deep, resonant command, the ship seemed to stir. Like a slumbering titan awakening, its tremendous power and beauty revealed in a single breathtaking moment. Suspended motionless in the void, the vessel's golden hull unfolded vast, swept-back wings. Stretched wide like a bat's membrane, they shimmered not in dull bronze, but in a deep, peacock sapphire blue, each facet catching the light and turning it into living color. With every subtle beat of those wings, the air around them rippled, weaving such an exquisite tapestry that it became impossible to tell whether one floated in a dream or stood on solid ground. Under Ethan's precise control, the spacecraft rose with an almost lyrical grace, as though resonating in perfect harmony with heaven and earth. Every adjustment, every minute shift in attitude felt inevitable, as if the cosmos itself conspired to lift the ship skyward. Kasumigaoka Shiyu stood upon the gleaming deck without so much as a whisper of wind against her face. She neither wobbled nor trembled at the ship's soaring ascent. An unseen force held her firmly to the hull, as if affirming, "Here you belong." And so, anchored by that silent power, she watched the stars draw ever closer, ready for whatever lay beyond the edge of space. The sensation was both exhilarating and strangely comforting, as if the golden ship itself exerted a gentle gravitational pull, drawing Kasumigaoka Shiyu closer to the mysteries of the sky. Far below, Tokyo's glittering sprawl was dwarfed by the vessel's colossal hull, which gleamed like a drifting palace of burnished light. From ground level, it was impossible to miss or ignore its brilliance. Inside, the only furnishing was the high-backed throne where Captain Ethan sat, his expression hidden in shadow. Despite the ship's sparse interior, its powerful thermal emissions couldn't be disguised. Human satellites had already locked onto the heat signature. Yet, thanks to Ghidorah's Category 6 superstorm, every orbiting camera feed was scrambled by hurricane-force winds. All anyone could tell was that a massive UFO had appeared above Tokyo, big enough to provoke panic in governments, militaries, and news agencies worldwide. As the craft glided through the tempest with effortless grace, Shiyu felt her racing heart begin to slow. Still, the questions buzzing in her mind only grew louder. She found Ethan's gaze as he surveyed the storm-racked city beneath them. Curiosity and anticipation shone in her eyes. "Captain," she asked, her voice steady despite the roar of the wind, "where are we going?" As Ethan's golden spacecraft veered away from Ghidorah instead of diving headlong into battle, Busujima Seiko watched from the rubble and let out a brief, shaky sigh, only to feel fresh peace coil around his heart. "Go pick someone up," Ethan's calm, resolute voice crackled over the comms. Perched on the pilot's throne inside the gleaming vessel, Ethan propped his chin on one hand, his eyes alight with quiet confidence. He guided the ship across Tokyo's ravaged skyline, weaving between storm clouds and the skeletons of shattered skyscrapers. Down below, he finally spotted Seiko, sword strapped to his side, darting through the debris. Renowned as a master swordsman, Seiko now looked thoroughly defeated. Ghidorah's three-headed fury had reduced most of Tokyo to ruins, driving panicked survivors into every alley and side street. Even his extraordinary skill offered little defense against such cataclysmic power, and a deep sense of despair weighed on him. Just as he was about to abandon hope and push on in search of shelter, a voice drifted down from above, familiar yet eerily new, like the whisper of the wind, shattering the haze clouding his mind. Saiko Busujima. To Ethan, the name was as refreshing as a morning breeze, stirring something deep behind his calm gaze. Saiko lifted her head, peering through the swirling dust to the gleaming golden spacecraft hovering overhead. Its brilliance rivaled the sun's, too intense to stare at for long, yet within that glare lay the faintest promise of salvation. Her heart thundered in her chest, and sparks of hope lit her eyes, a desperate plea for a miracle. "Master!" Her voice was thin as gossamer but brimming with warmth and excitement. Could it be true? In the depths of their despair, had rescue finally arrived? Ethan inclined his head, his expression as serene as still water. "Come aboard." Without hesitation, Saiko steadied herself. The ship's gentle artificial gravity guided her upward as she leapt like a swift swallow, landing gracefully on the deck. At that moment, she felt as though she'd slipped into another world. Far below her, the crumbling ruins and howling storms receded, replaced by the serene sky that Ethan held aloft above them. Standing beside him and gazing down at the shrunken cityscape, she experienced a surge of security and belonging unlike anything she'd ever known. In a world torn apart by chaos, such a peaceful patch of sky was a rare and precious gift. Nearby, Kasumigaoka Uta watched Saiko Busujima and Ethan with unreadable curiosity. She hadn't expected Ethan to soar so far in search of Saiko, and she couldn't hide the blend of confusion and intrigue in her expression. Saiko, for her part, met Utaha's gaze in midair, and though neither spoke, a delicate tension wove between them, two souls from very different worlds, brought face to face by fate. Below them, Ethan's gleaming golden spacecraft sliced through the air until they spotted Shizuka Hiratsuka amid the rubble. Shizuka was struggling to pull herself free from the wreckage, her features etched with exhaustion and worry. Together, these four, Ethan, Saiko, Utaha, and Shizuka, hovered above the ruin, each drawn into a moment that would change all of their lives. The disaster struck so suddenly that Shizuka Hiratsuka didn't even have time to evacuate or gather her students. In the ensuing chaos, they scattered in every direction, vanishing into the smoky haze. Then, high above the crumbling cityscape, a brilliant flash of gold caught her eye. Ethan's spaceship, its hull gleaming like molten metal, hovered into view. Shizuka's heart pounded as she stared upward, her mouth falling open in disbelief. For a moment, it seemed like a mirage, but the blinding radiance and immense bulk of the craft left no room for doubt. A clear, urgent voice rang out from above. "Get on board. This isn't safe down here." Frozen in shock, Shizuka hesitated. Then, impossibly, she felt a gentle tug at her chest, a magnetic pull from the ship itself. Swallowing her fear, she took a deep breath and let herself be drawn into the golden light. Chapter 1123, King Ghidorah versus the King's Treasure. Hiratsuka Shizuka leapt up and landed securely aboard the spaceship. For a moment, it felt as if she'd been rescued from hell and lifted back into heaven. Her heart swelled with gratitude and relief. "What now?" she asked Ethan the instant she crossed the threshold. "Should we abandon Tokyo, even Japan?" Her voice trembled with anxiety. The monster ravaging the city was far beyond ordinary human defense, and they didn't yet know that the American forces had already been wiped out. If they had, her despair would be even greater. Ethan shook his head, his expression calm and resolute. "No," he said, "I'm going to stop that creature." A burst of static crackled through the ship's intercom as the system AI piped up. "Boss, Ghidorah cost a tremendous amount of energy to materialize. Do you really want to kill it?" The AI's tone betrayed its concern over the wasted power. Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming with purpose. "Relax," he replied. "We're not going to destroy him outright. Instead, we'll give King Ghidorah a new ability." Shizuka stared in disbelief as the captain turned toward the ship's central console. The air around them shimmered slightly, charged with the promise of whatever plan Ethan had in mind. With a few swift commands, he began to reconfigure the monster's parameters, preparing to unleash an unexpected twist in the battle for Tokyo. Ethan's plan hung in the control room like a challenge. Allow King Ghidorah's own flesh and blood to assimilate every living thing, spawning countless subspecies of the golden three-headed dragon. One mighty Ghidorah would become an endless legion, each new creature feeding him ever more power. The ship's AI fell silent for a heartbeat, then pulsed with excitement. "Brilliant," it whispered through the comms. "Reconfiguring internal energy flows now. I'll overwrite Ghidorah's biomatrix, trigger the spread of his assimilative tissue across the battlefield." Hiratsuka Shizuka watched the energy gauges spike. Her voice wavered as she leaned closer to the viewport. "Ethan, are you sure this?" He cut her off with a calm, confident smile. "To you, it may look terrifying. To me, it's just another equation." Outside, their golden ship glowed like a shard of sunlight piercing the storm. Ethan eased the throttle forward. Pillars of cloud rolled away on either side as he bore down on the chaotic land where King Ghidorah roared his dominion. At this speed, blinding, unreal, there was no turning back. "System," Ethan said. "Initiate assimilation protocol." "Acknowledged," the AI replied, voice crackling with anticipation. "Ghidorah's new power is online." Below them, the first tendrils of the mutated dragon's flesh began reaching skyward, hungry for life. And as the ship dove into the maelstrom, Ethan prepared to watch a single monster multiply into an unstoppable force. A Category 6 hurricane was tearing through the region, roaring winds and roiling black clouds unleashing nature's rawest fury. Yet through the tempest's fury, a gleaming golden spacecraft cut a brilliant shaft of light across the sky, a striking beacon of hope in an otherwise desperate scene. On the ship's observation deck stood Saiko Busujima, Shizuka Hiratsuka, and Shizuka Kasumigaoka, their faces a mixture of steely resolve and deep concern. Despite their different backgrounds and temperaments, they were bound together by a single, urgent purpose, the fate of Ethan. Ever since King Ghidorah's ominous stirrings had set Earth on high alert, every satellite and radar array scrambled to pinpoint his location. But the hurricane's chaotic winds had rendered close-range surveillance all but impossible. Satellite feeds were indiscernible, radar readings hopelessly scrambled. All anyone could do was piece together the monster's movements through indirect clues. Now, with the golden ship's sudden arrival, they had a new vantage point, and possibly a new ally, in their desperate search. As the storm raged on, Saiko, Shizuka, and Shizuka exchanged remind glances. The hurricane might shroud Ghidorah in darkness, but they refused to let that darkness consume Ethan. With their combined skills and the ship's radiant technology, they would press on, no matter how fierce the storm. "Look, what's that?" A voice, tinged with both shock and wonder, cut through the howling wind. Far above, a golden gleam hovered in the sky. On the Japanese side of the devastated coastline, hopeful murmurs erupted. "Could it be Amaterasu Omikami?" Someone cried. "Is she here to protect us?" Memories of ancient myth swelled in their hearts. At their darkest hour, the sun goddess herself had come to deliver them. Meanwhile, on the American command deck, high-tech radar and infrared scanners struggled against the Category 6 hurricane's interference. The brilliant craft refused to resolve into a clear image. Officers exchanged worried glances. They needed answers. Was this ally or adversary? At that critical instant, Ethan stepped forward. His outstretched hand seemed to reach the golden vessel itself. In response, the ship blazed to life, pouring searing light and warmth into the storm's eye. Gusts of wind subsided, torrential rain stilled. One by one, the monstrous hurricane clouds unraveled, as though the very air had been commanded to stand down. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Sea and sky stilled, time itself suspended in the hush that followed. The question now wasn't who had come to save them, but what Ethan would do next. Military satellites and reconnaissance aircraft worldwide reoriented their lenses toward Tokyo's sky, struggling to capture the unbelievable. "What is that?" flashed across control room monitors. When high-definition cameras zoomed in, viewers everywhere were stunned. A spaceship hewn from pure gold, floating motionless above the city. It bore no visible engines or thrusters, yet it hovered effortlessly. Even more baffling, its deck was entirely empty except for a single, open-air throne. No control consoles, no mechanical systems. How did it stay aloft, and who were the one man and three women aboard? On that gilded throne sat Ethan, his eyes burning like twin beacons as he fixed his gaze on King Ghidorah below. The colossal three-headed beast snarled at the golden vessel's intrusion, then reared back all three necks and unleashed streams of radiant golden gravitational energy aimed directly at Ethan. Ethan's ship plunged into a shimmering trap of intertwining energy beams, an invisible net poised to ensnare him. Instead of faltering, the space behind him seemed to rip open under an unseen force. From that tier, a flood of golden light rushed forth, surging across the sky like a rising tide and turning the heavens a radiant amber. From the brilliance, ethereal weapons took shape, spears, blades, and staves of pure gold, each humming with arcane power so intense it hurt to look at them head-on. At Ethan's command, they leapt into motion as if he were conducting a grand ballet of destruction. The weapons traced graceful arcs through the air, slashing through space with hissing roars. Wherever they crossed, the atmosphere crackled. Where they struck, blasts of golden energy exploded outward, illuminating Tokyo's skyline as though it were midday. King Ghidorah, its three heads writhing in fury, could not dismiss this onslaught. The monster reared back and unleashed a trio of heavier, more focused gravity beams in a desperate bid to shatter Ethan's celestial arsenal. Lightning converged on lightning as golden weapons clashed against drenching torrents of gravitational energy. Each strike sent shockwaves ripping through the sky, and each parry ignited the night with blinding, triumphant light. But Ethan's treasures seemed inexhaustible, pouring forth from the void in a relentless stream that shattered Ghidorah's defenses one by one. Each golden relic collided with the monster's gravity beams in midair, entwining with them before erupting in a thunderous roar and a blinding cascade of light. Above Tokyo, the sky turned into a molten sea of gold, as countless brilliant flashes wove together into an immense, shimmering net that held Ghidorah fast. Chapter 1124, Global Live Broadcast. No one could believe their eyes. It was as though reality itself had been rewritten in an instant. "Is this some kind of mythic war?" one of the U.S. garrison officers stammered, voice trembling with awe. The officers stood frozen, faces pale with disbelief. The sky, once a tranquil blue, had been rent by two impossibly bright forces. On one side hung the colossal silhouette of a three-headed dragon, its scales gleaming like burnished gold. On the other, an ancient spacecraft, also aglow in golden light, hovered above what appeared to be a timeless arc. At over 150 meters tall, the dragon brought to mind the legendary Ghidorah of Western lore. Each of its heads unleashed crackling gravitational ray lightning, the beams slicing through the air and ripping the heavens apart. Opposing it, the golden spaceship seemed almost divine, a relic of another age, brimming with raw, space-bending power. Its engines flared with an otherworldly energy as it matched the dragon's fury blow for blow. Even the senior officials of the island nation were rendered speechless by the spectacle. They exchanged glances of utter shock, struggling to comprehend the clash unfolding overhead. Two titanic forces, one beast born of legend, the other a vessel transcending time, waged a battle that defied every law of nature. As the world watched in stunned silence, the skies blazed with golden light, and the ground trembled beneath the thunder of their cosmic war. Everyone knew, in that awe-filled moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. They were watching a legend come to life. High above Tokyo, a colossal golden dragon loomed, each thunderous flap of its wings unleashing gale-force winds that rattled skyscrapers below. No one had expected live battle footage to reach the city, yet here it was, lightning crackling across the night sky, neon signs flickering in stark contrast to the creature's raw, elemental power. An eerie hush had fallen over the streets, as if the very air trembled with anticipation. Hovering just beyond the fray was a lone civilian helicopter, Ethan's chopper, its rotors chopping through the tense air like a restless predator. In the cockpit, Ethan's knuckles whitened around the cyclic. Sweat beaded on his brow as he wrestled with his nerves, every instinct screaming to pull away from the chaos unfolding below. But despite the danger, he stayed aloft, determined to capture the impossible duel playing out beneath him. Konoha Hashirama, the seasoned TBS TV correspondent, could hardly contain his excitement. Beside him, the camera in his hands never stopped adjusting its angle, the step straining to record every explosive moment unfolding below. The helicopter they were in was nothing more than the network's standard news chopper, Today's assignment had been a routine survey of how the sudden downpour was snarling city traffic. But fate, as it so often does, had other plans. As they drifted over this district, their lenses stumbled upon a battle beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Closer! Closer! Konoha's voice was rough with exhilaration as he urged the pilot on. To him, this was the scoop of a lifetime, the kind of footage every journalist dreams of. We have to give our viewers the clearest picture we can get. The pilot's grip on the controls tightened, his face paling as the helicopter dipped lower. Below, an alien creature squared off against a gleaming golden starship, an encounter whose implications could shake humanity's beliefs to their core. With every foot they descended, the risk grew. If they ventured any nearer, the fallout might be more than just broken equipment. It could be downright catastrophic. But Ethan's eyes burned with a blend of determination and barely contained madness as he snapped at the pilot. "Get us closer, now!" The pilot gave a resigned sigh. He knew that if he refused, Ethan would simply wrench the controls from him, and the consequences would be far worse. Reluctantly, he guided the helicopter nearer to the heart of the battle. Through the camera's viewfinder, Ethan beheld an incredible sight, a sleek spaceship bathed in golden light, suspended in midair and locked in brutal combat with a titanic three-headed monster. Each sinuous neck ended in a cavernous maw that unleashed searing bolts of golden gravitational lightning, so bright they turned the night sky to glaring daylight. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears as he steadied the camera, zooming in on the epic struggle. There, on the deck of the spaceship, sat a lone figure gripping the controls, while three more stood at attention around him, poised for whatever came next. What made the scene even more astonishing wasn't missiles or artillery shells streaking through the sky, but weapons of every conceivable type, swords, spears, halberds, glaives, all hurled with uncanny precision. Each blade seemed almost alive, flashing with cold steel as it shattered the monster's strikes, gouging deep, ragged wounds in its hide. The live feed, broadcast by TBS, sent shockwaves through the city, and soon the entire nation. Viewers glued to their screens stared in disbelief. "Is that a man?" someone whispered. "A superhuman?" another gasped. Fingers jabbed at the monitor. "Look at him. Ethan's actually piloting that ship and firing these ancient weapons at the creature." As Ethan continued his surreal duel against the rampaging beast, TBS's ratings soared through the roof, smashing every previous record. What had been a peaceful urban evening exploded into a fevered spectacle, every eye fixed on the lone young man fighting to save them all. Ethan's helicopter had set out on nothing more dramatic than a routine patrol. Yet somehow it had veered into an active combat zone, transforming, overnight, into a living bridge between the everyday world and a nightmare of war. From rooftop landing pads to crowded city squares, every head turned skyward as the chopper's bright searchlights sliced through the darkness. Below, the city's gleaming skyline collided with the orange glow of distant explosions. Tracers leapt across the horizon like fiery fireflies, and the staccato rhythm of gunfire echoed off steel and glass. The spectacle felt unreal, as if a dream had spilled onto the streets, and people everywhere scrambled for their TVs. In living rooms and corner cafes, seniors and schoolchildren alike stared in stunned silence. Ethan's voice crackled over the comm channel as he hovered above the front line, the whine of the rotor blades underscoring each report of advancing troops in flare bursts. On social media, hashtags exploded. Every retweet and status update carried equal parts awe and disbelief, as if the entire world had paused its scrolling to bear witness. Inside the TBS control room, the mood was electric. Producers barked instructions. Editors' fingers flew across keyboards and control boards. They cut between multiple camera angles, adjusted satellite feeds, and layered in live commentary. Each team member bent on one goal, to deliver this unprecedented battle, frame by riveting frame, to an audience that refused to look away. The live TBS broadcast didn't just capture every move of the monster. It did something far more significant. It revealed the existence of superhumans to the world for the very first time. Even though the camera's distance and angles kept their faces out of focus, there was no mistaking what viewers were seeing. Superhumans. In that instant, millions of people saw their understanding of reality upend itself. Chapter 1125, Slay the Dragon. In that instant, the beliefs of millions shattered as though torn by an invisible force. Every rule and piece of common sense people had depended on felt unbearably fragile. The image of a superhuman warrior dueling a towering monster, once confined to the realm of movies and comic books, was playing out in real time, broadcast live to screens around the world. "Is this real? Are we even still on Earth?" whispered viewers everywhere, disbelief echoing in living rooms, cafes, and offices alike. They stared at the footage, searching for some rational explanation in the chaos before them. Thanks to TBS's live signal, the battle transcended every border, from sleepy European villages to sprawling American metropolises, from bustling Asian cities to remote African settlements. Daily life ground to a halt as people paused to witness this historic moment. High above the battleground, a lone news helicopter hovered, its spotlight carving through the smoke and dust. Below, Ethan squared off against the three-headed menace known as King Ghidorah. Amid the beast's thunderous roars and crackling lightning, Ethan's gaze flicked to the chopper above, a silent reminder that the entire world was watching. Since the moment the helicopter's camera joined the live broadcast, its reach exploded beyond national borders. It was soon a worldwide spectacle. The system that powered the feed practically short-circuited with excitement, feverishly drawing in emotional energy from millions of viewers. These surges of feeling crashed in like a tidal wave, skyrocketing past the 8-digit mark in an instant. And those raw emotions didn't come solely from ordinary onlookers. More than half were born of the characters caught up in the unfolding drama. Heroes and villains, bystanders and warriors alike, each clashing ambition and fear, magnified tenfold by the camera's glare. Their highs and lows fed the system's appetite, fueling the broadcast's ever-widening influence. High above the commotion, Ethan Hashirama sat strapped into the reporter's seat, completely oblivious to the invisible currents of energy swirling around him. All he could think about was the story unfolding beneath him and the chance that this scoop might make him the most celebrated journalist on the planet. As the whirling rotors droned, his pulse quickened with anticipation. The unknown was out there, and he was determined to capture every electrifying moment. Ethan pressed forward, excitement lighting his eyes as he called to the helicopter pilot. "Come closer. I need clear shots of their faces, their expressions, their every move. This is front-page material." But the pilot's grip on the controls tightened, his voice tense with unease. "Sorry, Ethan. We can't inch any nearer. Look at that fight below. If we get any closer, we'll get caught in the blast. The fallout would be disastrous." From Ethan's position high above, hundreds of projectiles launched from his King's Treasure weapon system streaked downward like a meteor shower. Each beam of light thrummed with ancient, unfathomable power, slicing through the air and striking King Ghidorah's massive form with pinpoint precision. The three-headed dragon unleashed a deafening roar of agony and rage as each impact raked its flesh like 1,000 razor blades, sending tremors through its colossal wings. Though Ghidorah's legendary regenerative powers could shrug off ordinary assaults, the artifacts in Ethan's King's Treasure were anything but ordinary, and the creature's defiance rang hollow against their onslaught. These aren't ordinary weapons. Each treasure Ethan wields bristles with arcane power specifically attuned to the immortal body. Some suppress cellular regeneration, others corrode life force outright, and the most malevolent carry curses that prevent any healing. Confronted with such dark magic, King Ghidorah's legendary regenerative prowess falters. Wounds that should knit shut only fester and gape. Kasumigaku Taha, Busujima Seiko, and Hiratsuka Shizuka stand transfixed, hearts pounding, with disbelief. They've never witnessed an attack so merciless, never imagined Ethan could command such overwhelming strength. The once invincible behemoth now quivers before him, its every movement betraying fragility as if it might collapse at any moment. With each sweep of Ethan's treasures, Ghidorah's claws and wings are cleaved to splinters. Scales peel away from its draconic head, revealing raw, bleeding flesh beneath. Blood erupts in scarlet fountains, splattering the ground and filling the air with the metallic scent of iron. In that crimson haze, even the mightiest monster looks on the brink of destruction. Ghidorah's hide was perforated by the relentless onslaught of Ethan's treasures, its once imposing form now pocked with deep, smoking holes. The The mighty three-headed dragon no longer radiated the regal power it had displayed moments before. Saiko Busujima stared in awe. "Are all your weapons really this powerful?" she asked, her voice trembling with curiosity. After all, humanity had thrown everything at Ghidorah, state-of-the-art missiles, fighter jets, even bunker-buster bombs, yet the monster had shrugged off every attack. And now, with only these strange artifacts, Ethan had driven Ghidorah into a desperate corner. "Absolutely," Ethan replied, his tone calm but resolute. He took a deliberate step forward. "This ends here." No sooner had he spoken than a roaring wave of energy radiated from his body. Golden light surged outward like a rising tide, wrapping him in a luminous aura that crackled with raw power. The air itself seemed to tremble, and every witness, soldiers, scientists, even Ghidorah, paused in stunned silence. Then, with a gesture as simple as it was majestic, Ethan drew forth from the king's treasury the legendary mountain-slashing sword. It shimmered in his grip, its blade humming with ancient might, an omen that the final blow was about to be struck. With a single, focused thought, Ethan sent ripples of golden lin light radiating outward like a vast, unfolding tapestry. From those shimmering waves emerged a colossal double-edged blade, larger than the peak of any mountain, its polished steel reflecting an icy brilliance that seemed capable of severing every obstacle in its path. This was the legendary Mountain Jianying sword, once wielded by the god of war Zababa himself. Its broad, razor-sharp body carried the terrible promise of world-shattering force in every stroke. As the sword took form, its sheer magnitude stunned everyone who beheld it. Onlookers across the human realms watched the live broadcast in awed silence. Then one voice broke through the hush. "Waldfalk, what's happening? That human actually summoned a weapon this enormous." Another chimed in, disbelief heavy in his tone. "He must have elemental mastery over metal. How else could he call forth a blade of that scale?" A third observer murmured, barely concealing his dread. "I feel like that dragon is finished." "Could this be the fabled dragon slayer of ancient myth?" someone whispered, horror and wonder lacing each syllable. Across every viewing platform, mankind sat riveted and terrified by the sight. Ethan's emergence of the Mountain Jianying sword had shattered every expectation of what a single warrior could achieve. They all gathered to dissect Ethan's identity and abilities, trading theories about how this battle would ultimately unfold. Chapter 1126, After Slaying the Dragon. A hush fell over the battlefield as Ghidorah's three great heads recoiled, sensing the sudden shift in tides. Terror and despair flickered in each of its massive reptilian eyes, and its colossal form trembled uncontrollably. Gouts of smoke curled from its nostrils, but no roar came, only ragged, defeated gasps. Ghidorah found itself pierced by hundreds of arcane relics, each one driven through its golden scales and buried deep into flesh and sinew. Far from dropping free, these talismans clung fiercely to its wounds, drawing out every drop of vitality with a cruel, leech-like hunger. Every heartbeat sent waves of agony through its body. Every struggle only confirmed its power draining away. Ethan stood before the fallen titan, his grip steady on the hilt of the mountain-slashing sword. As he raised it, the blade ignited in a corona of pure, golden light. He swung in a single, fluid motion, so swift and true that the air itself split with the blade's passage. The sword traced a brilliant arc overhead, as if he had cleaved the heavens in two. The moment that radiant edge met Ghidorah's trembling flank, the impact unleashed a cataclysmic wave of energy. It roared outward like a tsunami, flattening debris, uprooting battered banner poles, and hurling dust and rubble skyward. The ground quaked. Nearby warriors were thrown off their feet. Even the wind seemed to recoil before the blast, carrying the echo of that otherworldly strike for miles around. When the dust settled and the shockwave subsided, Ghidorah lay motionless, its three heads drooping in final hollow slumps. Around its battered body, the field fell silent, broken only by the distant crackle of smoldering ruins and the ragged breaths of survivors. All eyes turned to Ethan, sword still blazing, standing alone in the wake of an impossible victory. The earth shuddered with a titanic shockwave, as though reality itself had been struck. At the center of the upheaval, Ethan's blade, known among those who knew of it as the Mountain Sunderer, came down in a single devastating arc. King Ghidorah's colossal form split cleanly from the central neck to its abdomen. Golden scales cracked apart, and geysers of thick crimson blood spurted skyward, painting the ground in a brutal tableau. With a final, echoing roar, the dragon's middle head went dark. Its massive body went limp and crashed to the scorched earth in two lifeless halves. "Is it over?" Kasumigaku Taha breathed, voice trembling as she and the others stared in awe at the fallen beast. None of them had ever imagined witnessing such a cataclysmic moment in person. It was like stepping into legend. Ethan stood above the corpse, his blade still humming with residual power. After a moment, he nodded once, sharply. "It's over," he confirmed, though his face remained stern. "But we can't leave the remains behind, certainly not for America or Japan to seize." He lifted the mountain sunderer once more. From its edge rippled waves of golden light, spreading outward like rings on a pond. Dozens of luminous chains shot forth from those ripples, snaking through the air to coil around the severed halves of Ghidorah's body. The chains tightened, their glow intensifying as they bound the dragon's corpse, preparing it for removal to a secure location, far from any prying eyes. The golden chains twirled through the air like living serpents, each tipped with a gleaming blade that caught the light with icy precision. Ethan unleashed the full might of his signature technique, Heaven's Chains. The blades pierced and coiled around King Ghidorah's massive form, dragging the three-headed colossus into a growing, swirling vortex of molten gold. With a final, earth-shaking roar, Ghidorah vanished into the shimmering maelstrom. Below, the American garrison watched in stunned silence. Opportunity of a lifetime, wasted. If only they could have captured Ghidorah's body, they might unlock secrets of eternal life. Legend held that those who bathed in a dragon's blood gained its power forever. A dragon's core. Imagine what studying it could do for science, and for us, one officer panted, chest heaving. He struck his palm with a clenched fist, furious at his own helplessness. No matter how much they regretted it, none dared challenge Ethan now. If his strength had humbled King Ghidorah itself, how could they hope to seize his prize from the man who had just become the greatest dragon slayer in history? Though the immediate danger from the monsters had passed, the world's order felt as unsettled as a wind-whipped sea. Nothing would ever be the same. When the live broadcast ended, stunned viewers sank into deep reflection. They realized that their reality was far more complex than they'd ever imagined. Creatures and abilities once confined to fantasy, monsters and superhumans, had appeared before them as if in a waking dream. On social media, discussion of the dragon-slaying battle spread like wildfire. Under the hashtag #DragonSlayerBattle, opinions flooded in from every corner. Some hailed Ethan's astonishing strength, likening him to a hero sprung from myth. Others dug deeper, questioning whether the world they knew had been a carefully maintained illusion. In-depth articles popped up overnight, ranging from rigorous analyses to emotional testimonials. Together, they formed a vast field of public dialogue, teeming with doubt, wonder, and the urgent desire to understand what this new reality truly meant. Do we truly understand this world? On his blog, Truth Explorer, Ethan wrote, "Those storylines we once dismissed as pure science fiction have now become the harsh reality we must face. It makes you wonder if everything we thought we knew is only the tip of the iceberg. What other truths lie hidden beneath the surface?" Panic spread through the populace like wildfire. Fear of the unknown drove citizens to demand someone to lean on, and all too quickly they pointed their fingers at the government. In their eyes, these unprecedented events must have been kept under wraps by officials. Though they clamored for accountability, what they really feared was what lay ahead. The monster's arrival had already wrought staggering havoc. The full extent of the casualties was still being tallied, but even preliminary figures painted a grim picture. At the same time, the international landscape shifted overnight. The United States, long established as a global military power, swiftly dispatched a newly assembled fleet to the waters where the creature first appeared. As alliances realigned and tensions mounted, it became clear that this was only the beginning of a far larger struggle for control, security, and the very truth of our world. Outer Tokyo Bay lay under a steel-gray sky as the U.S. battle fleet held its vigil. One by one, colossal warships formed an unbroken line, America's own Great Iron Wall, encircling two mighty aircraft carriers at the center. Those carriers were more than symbols of naval dominance. They were America's field headquarters in this crisis. Between them, almost inconspicuous amid the war machines, floated the research vessel Reagan. True to her name, the Reagan had been transformed into a floating laboratory, bristling with cutting-edge biological research gear that rivaled even Cold Spring Harbor's finest instruments. It was this very ship that had enabled the United States to plug into the ongoing investigation so quickly, gathering data and formulating countermeasures. Just then, the door to the Reagan's sterile main lab slid open. Dr. Samuel Mason, an elderly biologist with iron-gray hair and a face map lined by decades of study, stepped out. Clad in a crisp lab coat, he paused on the threshold, hands clasped behind his back, and surveyed the humming corridor. The soft echo of his footsteps blended with the distant drone of engines and the steady thrum of the carrier's catapults. Behind him stood Ethan, the Reagan's youngest field researcher. Though barely 25, Ethan's eyes shone with determination. He had pored over endless data streams through the night, chasing the monster outbreak's genetic foo, Thold. Now, as Mason approached, Ethan braced himself for orders that would shape America's and the world's next move. "We've isolated the pathogen's key protein markers," Ethan reported, voice measured but urgent. "If we can engineer an inhibitor that targets those receptors, we might curb the mutations." Dr. Mason nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Assemble your team. You'll need every sample we've collected, tissue, blood, even the coral swabs from the bay floor. Prepare for a full-scale trial in the containment wing." Ethan's heart pounded. This mission had already cost an entire fleet. Failure was unthinkable. Outside, the grand carriers loomed like silent sentinels, ready to launch their wings of steel at the first sign of threat. Yet here, within these sterile halls, the true battle would be fought, one of science, courage, and desperate hope. As Ethan and his colleagues hurried back into the lab to marshal their data, Dr. Mason lingered in the corridor a moment longer, gazing out a porthole at the gray warship standing guard. The coming days would test them all. But if anyone could unlock the secrets living within those monstrous creatures, it would be the small crew aboard the Reagan, led by a young scientist named Ethan. Though exhaustion tugged at his features, excitement still sparkled in his eyes. Chapter 1127, Dragon's Blood and America's Descent into Madness. Outside the laboratory door, a group of senior officers, some in Navy dress blues, others in Defense Ministry greens, waited in tense silence. Each man shifted his weight from one foot to the other, eyes flicking to the clock, then back to the sealed entrance. Finally, a lieutenant general cleared his throat. "Doctor, have you reached any conclusions?" The lead scientist, flanked by his team, nodded gravely. "We're almost finished with the genetic analysis. The creature's DNA doesn't match a single known life form on Earth. No plants, no animals, not even the most ancient fossils buried deep underground share any sequence similarities." A stunned hush fell over the gathering. The general's voice was barely more than a whisper. "So you're saying it's alien?" "Precisely," the doctor replied. "Our preliminary judgment is that this organism is not of terrestrial origin, but arrived here from outer space, perhaps even another world altogether." A collective gasp rippled through the officers. They had steeled themselves for shocking news, yet still found it hard to absorb. The implications were staggering. If this creature truly came from beyond our planet, everything they thought they knew about life on Earth and the universe was about to change. After all, this was far more than a mere scientific inquiry. It was a question that could shape the future of humanity. Although Ethan had claimed Ghidorah's core body for study, countless fragments of the beast's flesh and blood still lay scattered among the ruins of Tokyo. Like shards of luminous gemstones, they pulsed with an almost magnetic allure. Everyone who saw them understood at once why they were so fiercely sought after. These remnants might unlock abilities beyond anything science had ever conceived. To secure those prized fragments, the United States had thrown every resource into the operation. A massive naval fleet formed an unbroken cordon around the devastated city, as if casting a gigantic net over the battlefield. Above, fighter jets screamed through the skies, while helicopters flitted between rubble-strewn streets, leaving no corner unchecked. No request for access, no matter who made it, was entertained. The U.S. even leaned on the island's government, shutting down any diplomatic appeals. Not even close allies like Japan were permitted to intervene. In the heart of this fortress stood rows of scientists clad in white protective suits. Carefully and methodically, they gathered every piece of Ghidorah's remains: shards of iridescent hide, droplets of glowing blood, fragments of bone that seemed to hum with latent energy. Each specimen was meticulously catalogued and sealed for transport. It was clear to all observers that these researchers weren't simply collecting samples. They were harvesting the building blocks of the next leap in human evolution. They worked with specialized collection vials and instruments, each movement deliberate and precise, afraid to miss a single trace of material that might hold a miracle. Some samples of dragon flesh and blood lay dried to a deep, dark red. Others remained damp, as if still pulsing with the breath of life. "Doctor! Doctor!" a young officer called out, his voice quivering with excitement. "Sir, what we, and the high command back home, most urgently want to know is this." The officer's eagerness was unmistakable. They hadn't come for a dry lecture on cellular structure. Dr. Ethan raised a hand to quiet him. All right, he said, half impatient, half amused. He knew that for these soldiers, a straightforward answer was worth far more than pages of theory, but in his work, every detail mattered. Leaning forward, Dr. Ethan fixed the officer with a calm, steady gaze. "I know exactly what you're asking. You want to know if dragon flesh and blood can grant eternal life, don't you?" A faint smile tugged at his lips. Then, with measured confidence, he offered a single word: yes. His concise reply struck the silent laboratory like a bolt of lightning. "Good." The general's eyes gleamed with unrestrained excitement, as if he'd laid witness to the very dawn of immortality. "Excellent." His voice boomed across the cavernous conference room, vibrating with barely contained eagerness. The lieutenant general, at his side, echoed the sentiment, and the other officers broke into broad grins of triumph. After all, they had sailed thousands of miles, deploying both the 3rd and 5th fleets, all to recover the fabled dragon's flesh and blood, the mythical substance said to grant untold power. And now, against all odds, it lay within their grasp. Their exultation was boundless. Yet behind their jubilation lay the silent suffering of the island's populace. Ghidorah, the gargantuan beast of world-shattering might, had nearly razed Tokyo to the ground. Once a thriving metropolis, the city now lay in smoldering ruin, scores of lives swept away in a tide of devastation, survivors left to wander streets of ash and wreckage, haunted by loss. To them, despair was the only constant. But to the United States military leadership, this catastrophe represented something altogether different, a God-sent opportunity. Dragon flesh and blood isn't just a symbol of power, it's the key to immortality. At the pinnacle of influence, America's highest-ranking leaders could no longer accept lives limited by time or the frailty of mortal flesh. They hungered for eternity and the ability to command everything in their path. The legendary dragon's blood was the treasure they yearned to possess. Just as these generals were basking in the belief that they were on the verge of seizing ultimate power, the chief scientist's words cut through their excitement like an ice-cold torrent. However, the doctor's tone grew heavy, each syllable weighed down by an unspoken warning. The cellular activity we're observing in this dragon tissue is alarmingly abnormal, far beyond our initial projections. Ever since we introduced these cells into our test subjects, the volunteers have been utterly transformed. Yes, they now wield extraordinary abilities, and their regenerative processes and lifespans have multiplied exponentially, but their aggression has spiked to uncontrollable levels. They've become savage, almost inhumanly violent. A hushed panic rippled through the conference room. The generals exchanged uneasy glances. They had come seeking the fountain of everlasting life. Instead, they faced a force that might consume them all. Dr. Ethan paused, then continued in a steady voice. At the same time, these creatures' brains have undergone remarkable development, giving them intelligence far beyond that of ordinary humans. There's every reason to believe that, if we exposed people to the same process, we'd see identical results. The moment he spoke those words, the air in the conference room went cold. The assembled generals exchanged uneasy glances as excitement drained from their faces, replaced by a growing dread. Immortality was an intoxicating promise, but at what cost? If achieving eternal life meant forfeiting one's humanity, was it truly worth the risk? Questions they hadn't dared to ask themselves before now crowded their minds. "Doctor," Lieutenant General Harding finally broke the silence, his voice tight with anxiety. "Can you contain this transformation?" Dr. Ethan met his gaze calmly. After a thoughtful pause, he replied, "Possibly. I've never worked with a creature whose cellular structure and behavior are so radically different from anything in our databases, but I will dedicate myself to unlocking its mysteries, and, if there's a way, to controlling the assimilation process." A tense exhalation swept through the room as relief, however tentative, settled over the generals once more. Everyone in the room understood that Dr. Ethan was America's foremost biologist. His expertise and standing were simply irreplaceable. If he agreed to move forward with their plan, they might finally gain control of this power. "Doctor, you have our complete confidence," another lieutenant general said, his voice edged with urgency. Chapter 1128, Tokyo Temple Heaven Palace. Doctor Ethan inclined his head in thanks. He understood all too well the weight of the responsibility now resting on his shoulders, and he was even more aware of how dangerously tempting this promise of power was to the United States. Yet science demanded caution and patience. He could not recklessly sacrifice ethics or safety merely to satisfy the appetites of the powerful. Across the country, however, a frenzy had gripped the capital. The lure of harnessing dragon flesh and blood had united America's most influential players behind Ethan's research. The nation's wealthiest corporations stood ready to pour unlimited resources into his work, funding, cutting-edge equipment, and the finest talent available. In a rare display of unity, both Democrats and Republicans had set aside their partisan battles to back this project. Even the media, fully aware of the stakes, had fallen conspicuously silent, unwilling to jeopardize the interests of their sponsors. Dr. Ethan knew that some of this frenzy had begun with the public outcry over fallen soldiers in earlier skirmishes, an outcry that the parties had each used to attack the other, vying for political gain. But now, casualties and debates had faded into the background. The prevailing force in this new crusade was simple: in a world driven by capital, power, and profit, trump all else. And as the spotlight trained on him, Ethan steeled himself for the challenges ahead, determined to find a way to control the dragon's essence without losing his own integrity in the process. Chapter 1. Behind every protest and every outbreak of unrest, invisible financiers pull the strings. But this time is different. Both the Donkey Party and the Elephant Party have recognized the unparalleled potential of Ghidorah's flesh and blood. Driven by ambition, they've laid aside decades of bitter rivalry and formed a fragile alliance to seize this power. At the heart of their collaboration stands Dr. Ethan Lee, a leading molecular biologist. From the moment the coalition secured Ghidorah's remains, Ethan and his team have worked around the clock in their high-tech laboratory. Their goal is audacious: to master the assimilation of dragon cells so humans can harness these abilities safely. Progress, however, has been agonizingly slow. Dragon cells defy every expectation, behaving unpredictably, contradicting established biology, and collapsing cultures without warning. Instruments falter under the strain of unknown energies. Every experiment seems to open new doors to discovery and to new frustrations. Yet for Ethan, even a single breakthrough could rewrite human history. Meanwhile, on the island where Ghidorah fell, nature refuses to be contained. Though American forces retrieved the bulk of the dragon's flesh and blood, scattered fragments remain hidden among the ruins. In the twilight, black crows, ghostly in their flight, circle hungrily, searching for stray bits of power. Packs of wild dogs, their coats matted with mud and ash, roam the wreckage, their howls echoing against broken walls. These scavengers hunt instinctively, drawn by a force no human can fully explain. And in the shadows of that desolation, something still stirs, an echo of Ghidorah's ancient might, waiting to break free. Ethan crept to the rocky ridge overlooking the quarantine zone, his heart pounding at the sight below. Scuttling across the charred remains of Ghidorah's flesh were cockroaches the size of fistballs, rats bulky as shepherd dogs, mosquitoes whose buzzing formed a low, menacing hum, and even ordinary houseflies, each swollen grotesquely. Every one of these creatures had fed on Ghidorah's blood and tissue. Now, their bodies pulsed with unnatural power, muscles contorted into alien shapes, and horrified observers reported eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. These abominations were being dubbed subspecies Ghidorah, feral beasts infused with the Monster King's energy. Ethan's jaw dropped as a massive rat tore a steel girder in half as though it were cardboard. On his left, an oversized cockroach launched itself into the air, wings slicing a chunk out of the concrete wall behind it. A mosquito, its proboscis elongated into a razor-sharp proboscis, dived toward a squad of soldiers, piercing their helmets without effort. The transformations only grew more disturbing with every passing hour. Some of the creatures sprouted jagged horns capable of gouging through armored vehicles. Others developed carapaces as hard as tempered steel. At dawn, a pair of fly-like monstrosities soared above the shoreline, darkening the sky and shrieking in inhuman unison. Panic swept across the island nation. From the capital's gleaming boulevards to the tiniest fishing hamlets, citizens fled in every direction. The government mobilized its army and special forces, deploying armored columns and air support in a desperate bid to corral the creatures. But each assault met the same fate. Bullets ricocheted off steel-like shells, tanks were overturned by twisted horns, and aircraft were torn apart mid-air by those monstrous wings. Ethan checked his camera's last memory card, hands trembling. He knew this was only the beginning. If subspecies Ghidorah couldn't be contained soon, every corner of the island would fall, and who could predict what new horrors might emerge next? The creatures aren't just numerous. They possess remarkable intelligence and adaptability, so every attempt to contain them becomes a desperate struggle, and each confrontation brings devastating losses. In the face of this crisis, the island nation hasn't been left to fight alone. The international community has begun to take notice. A handful of countries and aid organizations have stepped in with technical expertise and supplies, but many others remain on the sidelines, adopting a wait-and-see stance. Some even treat the outbreak as the island's problem alone and refuse to get deeply involved. Amid this uncertainty, the island's Cabal saw a different opportunity. Ghidorah's flesh and blood radiate untapped power. If harnessed safely, they could transform entire industries and vault their companies to unprecedented heights. Quietly, several conglomerates pooled their resources to form the Ghidorah Research Association. They recruited the nation's leading biologists, chemists, and geneticists, tasking them with decoding the secrets of these Ghidorah subspecies and, if possible, finding a way to control them. Under intense, bright lighting, teams of scientists now work around the clock, driven by both ambition and the urgent need to protect their homeland. Scientists in laboratories around the world raced to understand the monstrous creatures that had laid waste to Tokyo. They collected tissue samples, sequenced their genomes, and searched for the source of those creatures' uncanny abilities. At the same time, military planners and industrial innovators schemed to adapt those powers into new technologies, or even next-generation weapons, to secure an edge in the inevitable global competition. Yet while nations fought a covert war in the lab, one man pursued an altogether different agenda. Ethan, celebrated hero of the dragon-slaying crusade, stood amid Tokyo's shattered skyline. The once vibrant city lay in silent ruin, every street and tower reduced to ash and rubble. And then, as dusk fell, the ruins began to glow with an otherworldly light, Ethan's divine gift at work. With a single calm gesture, he wove raw power into reality. Out of thin air rose a magnificent palace that hovered over the wreckage like a temple in the clouds. Every marble block and carved pillar seemed to pulse with soft radiance. The walls gleamed as if fashioned from moonlight. From the base of the ruins, a spiral of burnished silver stairs arched upward, a celestial ladder linking earth and sky. Each step throbbed with a faint spiritual energy that inspired awe and hushed reverence in all who beheld it. News of the floating palace spread swiftly to the highest councils of the island nation. Its leaders, awed, unsettled, and uncertain how to proceed, dared not confront a being of such godlike power. Instead, they selected a handful of trusted envoys and dispatched them to climb those gleaming stairs. Their mission: discover Ethan's true intentions before the world's precarious balance tipped irrevocably. The officials in crisp, tailored suits looked every bit the picture of solemn authority, but their composed facades cracked the moment they laid eyes on Ethan's handiwork. One murmured, "So this is the legendary shrine of Amaterasu Omikami." Another added in awe, "Can he really be a god?" A third ventured, "Or perhaps a deity from Takamagahara has descended among us." At that moment, 3 women stepped forward from the palace gates: Kasumigaoka Utaha, Busujima Seiko, and Hiratsuka Shizuka. Before the dragon-slaying battle, they had been ordinary citizens. Since then, their worldviews and the courses of their lives had shifted irrevocably. They had followed Ethan through impossible trials and witnessed miracles that defied explanation. Now, standing before the island nation's highest envoys, they radiated calm confidence, their eyes alight with a resolute glow. The leader of the delegation inclined his head in a gesture both respectful and eager. "Ladies," he began, voice measured, "I am a special envoy appointed by his cabinet. We have come to pay our respects to Lord God and to learn his intentions firsthand." His tone carried a subtle undercurrent of persuasion, as though he hoped these 3 witnesses might reveal more about Ethan's true nature than any official report could convey. Utaha Kasumigaoka offered a faint, knowing smile, her tone calm but unwavering. "Lord Ethan has declared that Tokyo, and, by extension our entire island nation, will be the demon's first foothold. It's a fate we cannot escape." "Demons?" The special agent's commander froze, disbelief etched across his face. The very concept lay far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Chapter 11129, The Greatest Change in 1,000 Years. Kasumigaoka Shiyu and her companions, once mere observers, now fervent heralds, stood before the island nation's highest officials. Their worldview had been forever altered by Ethan, and today they aimed straight for the top. At first, the envoys regarded this sudden delegation of young people with thinly veiled suspicion, but the moment Shiyu declared, "We stand on the threshold of a transformation unseen in 1,000 years," the conference hall fell utterly silent, as though the very air had turned to ice. Shock rippled across every face. Mouths tightened, brows furrowed, and anxious glances darted from one envoy to the next, each desperately seeking confirmation that they hadn't misheard. Yet Shiyu's words hung in the air like a thrown boulder, setting off invisible waves of uncertainty. Unbeknownst to the officials, miniature cameras and recorders hidden on Shiyu's person captured every stunned reaction. In real time, that footage was beamed back to the command center, ensuring that no one, even behind these walls, would ever doubt the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Inside the command center, bright lights illuminated a semicircle of specialists: psychologists, behavioral scientists, historians, climatologists, and more, each poised over banks of monitors. They pored anxiously over every data packet transmitted back, especially the message that kept repeating itself: "The greatest transformation in a millennium." As they probed its deeper meaning, a heavy silence settled over the room. Those 6 words carried more than a forecast. They felt like a solemn admonition about the world's fragile state. At one end of the long table, an elderly historian in thin, wire-framed glasses drummed his fingers on the wood and frowned. After a moment's hesitation, his voice emerged low and tremulous. "The last time I encountered such a phrase," he said, "was in the late Song dynasty. It came just before the Mongol cavalry swept across Asia and into Europe, reshaping the very contours of civilization. Now that this phrase has resurfaced, might it herald the end of one age and the birth of another?" The declaration, "Great changes unseen in 1,000 years," carries both colossal portent and unfathomable depth. It calls to mind history's great turning points: the collapse of the Roman Empire, the flourishing of the Renaissance, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. In today's uneasy climate, those words seem to warn that far more dramatic and unpredictable transformations lie just ahead. When they are spoken in the same breath as the recent monster assault on Tokyo, even the most seasoned experts feel a chill of apprehension. As the discussion deepened, a darker theory surfaced: the specter of global catastrophe, even apocalypse. Like a stone tossed into placid water, the idea sent shockwaves through the assembled scholars. At first, most dismissed it as alarmist, but then the evidence kept piling up: rising frequency of natural disasters, extreme climate anomalies around the world, and a string of ostensibly isolated yet eerily linked supernatural incidents. With each fresh incident, the doomsday hypothesis won over more adherents, until what was once deemed fringe now looms as a grim possibility on everyone's mind. Dr. Harris, the deputy leader of the research team, a scholarly man in his 50s with keen hawk-like eyes, pushed his tablet across the conference table. On its screen appeared a sweeping map of global climate data. Tapping the display, he pointed out that every time the Earth's climate has shifted dramatically, human civilization has stood at a crossroads. In antiquity, he explained, when the world was warmer and more humid, myths and legends flourished. People believed the supernatural was just beyond their reach, but with the onset of the Little Ice Age, those extraordinary phenomena faded. Society entered a long period of stability at the cost of wonder. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Then, in a solemn tone, he continued, "Today we face the end of the Little Ice Age. Temperatures are climbing, and extreme weather events are happening with alarming frequency. This isn't just an environmental crisis. It could signal the return of those ancient forces. Look here." He enlarged a graph overlaying temperature trends with historical records of supernatural activity. "See how the curves match? History may be about to repeat itself." At once, every scientist around the table sat forward, riveted by the possibility that the world was on the brink of something far stranger than mere climate change. They fell into hushed conversation, each expert scouring their own specialty for evidence to support or refute the claim. Could the great change actually mean a resurgence of spiritual energy? Came a tentative voice from the back of the room. But is that even possible? Has anything like it ever happened before? Deputy Director Chen, of the scientific research team, smiled as he tapped the chart on the screen behind him. "History is always full of surprises," he said. "We can't let our current knowledge dictate what the future might hold. A revival of spiritual energy may sound like the premise of a novel, but in a world brimming with unknowns, who's to say it can't occur?" With each passing moment, the discussion grew more animated, and the tension in the conference room rose accordingly. Every mind there was locked on the same unsettling question. If the unthinkable is truly underway, how will humanity face a transformation unseen in thousands of years? Chapter 7. A Question of Power. In the vaulted council chamber, debate crackled like lightning. Should humanity continue to lean on modern technology, striving to control every detail of existence? Or was it time to acknowledge the ancient power that had reappeared, and perhaps even harness it to propel our civilization forward? After all, the being who now called himself Ethan had voluntarily offered his aid. He claimed to be Chinese in origin, but why would he help us? Around the polished mahogany table, the island nation's senior officials exchanged skeptical glances. Not one believed Ethan to be a selfless savior. As experienced capitalists, they knew all too well that every favor carries a hidden price, especially in an era when demons threatened to return from the abyss. "What does he stand to gain by aiding us during this resurrection?" snapped one diplomat, leaning back in his high-backed chair. "He wields powers beyond our understanding. He must expect something in return." A hush fell, and all eyes turned to the short, mustachioed man seated at the head of the table. His salt-and-pepper hair curled above steely gray eyes. This was Matsushita Kenji, the patriarch of the island's most powerful zaibatsu and the undisputed leader of its financial elite. Matsushita Kenji tapped his ivory-headed cane against the floor, each soft click drawing the assembly's attention. "Your question is exactly why we cannot accept Ethan's words at face value," he said, his voice calm but firm. "In our world, power never comes without cost. Until we know his true motive, we cannot risk blind trust, even if the fate of our nation hangs in the balance. In an age when demons run rampant and human strength feels woefully inadequate, Ethan's sudden arrival has set every mind on edge." Inside the dimly lit command chamber, two officers paced before a holographic map dotted with crimson flashes. "Maybe he's simply too powerful," one murmured, voice tight with unease. "No one dares provoke him, so he never shows himself to us. Or perhaps he's already here in secret, and we don't even realize it." "Supernatural forces have always been beyond our grasp," his companion replied. "Invisible entities pulling strings behind the scenes, shaping events without ever stepping into the light." The first officer tapped the map, highlighting a burning Tokyo marker. "You've heard the stories, right? In that other world, America grappled with a dragon so immense it laid waste to all of Tokyo. They say Ethan cut it down, with a single strike. If beings like him were common, the second officer said, arms folded, they'd have conquered our world long ago. There wouldn't even be room for us to fight back. A heavy silence fell. Even if we understood this power, the first officer admitted at last, we couldn't hope to wield it ourselves. Resigned, they exchanged bleak looks. In that moment, hope felt as distant as the world beyond their understanding, and their despair hung in the air like a gathering storm. Chapter 1130, Tokyo's Night Parade of 100 Demons, City of Phantoms and Goblins. The United States, a two-ocean superpower, maintains an intelligence network so vast it reaches into nearly every corner of the globe. On that distant island nation, from the halls of power down to the humblest village, nothing escapes its steady scrutiny. So when the island's leaders secretly opened talks with the fabled God of Tokyo, the supernatural guardian said to walk among humans, word of it flew straight into American ears. In the weeks that followed, subtle shifts rippled through the land, a gathering storm that darkened the skies and set nerves on edge. Unexplained assaults began erupting everywhere, from the neon-lit avenues of the capital to the quiet rice paddies of the countryside. An oppressive, almost palpable dread settled over towns and hamlets alike. Investigations revealed a horrifying common thread. These attacks were carried out by a rogue subspecies of Ghidorah, creatures warped into violent savagery after being tainted by the original Ghidorah's flesh and blood. They've taken on nightmarish forms, some towering like grotesque insects, others twisted into bestial shapes that defy all reason. Wherever they appear, they leave nothing but terror in their wake. They are staggeringly powerful, creatures no ordinary human could face alone. Some resemble beings pulled from ancient myth, slipping through shadows by night or laying waste to cities in broad daylight. Demons and monsters of every sort have pushed the world to the brink of chaos. In island nations and across the United States, people have come to the grim realization that those fantastic beasts once confined to storybooks now threaten reality itself. After suffering countless tragedies, most of these creatures carry a single lesson etched deep into their instincts. Don't underestimate two-legged predators, and have learned to keep their distance from humans. Yet a handful of exceptions persist. Long-abused animals whose minds have snapped, or low-intelligence monsters suddenly infused with tremendous power, often spiral into madness. When they lose control, they become unbridled engines of destruction. Once the initial panic subsided, the governments and research institutes of island nations and the U.S. moved swiftly. They began to gather every scrap of data on these supernatural beings, seeking patterns, strengths, weaknesses, and to develop strategies for pushing back against this new, otherworldly threat. When Ethan and his companions consulted the Tokyo god of the human world, they learned how supernatural beings are ranked by strength: paper tier, dog tier, wolf tier, and tiger tier. At the bottom sits the paper tier. True to its name, a paper tier monster offers only a slight edge over a human, its muscles a bit stronger, its reflexes a bit sharper, but still as fragile as a sheet of parchment. One firm strike is enough to send it crumbling. Knowing that these lowest-ranked creatures can be defeated so easily brings a measure of comfort to humanity. Even in a world brimming with otherworldly power, there is vulnerability. Yet that fragility can be deceptive. A single paper-tier demon may be harmless, but dozens or hundreds of them moving in concert can wreak havoc on an unprepared town. Beyond the paper tier, the hierarchy grows more complex, with each successive rank signifying a dramatic leap in power and danger. Recognizing the threat these monsters pose on a global scale, the United States military, long regarded as the world's preeminent armed force, has devoted extensive resources to studying and containing supernatural entities of every tier. In the coming days, Ethan would witness firsthand how deep their research goes and just how far humanity must go to stand a chance against the unknown. They classified every creature above paper level into 3 informal tiers: slime, goblin, and ogre, even though official reports, to avoid misinterpretation, label those same tiers as dog level and wolf level. Dog level monsters are only a step up from paper level. They won't lay waste to entire cities, but can seriously threaten an unprepared individual. Wolf-level creatures are far more dangerous. They're capable of inflicting casualties and triggering full-scale emergencies. By contrast, the various subspecies spawned from Ghidorah's corrupting influence almost universally rank at least tiger level. These beasts can inflict heavy losses in a single engagement, making them a top priority for any government or military force. Beyond the predictable menace of Ghidorah's progeny, however, demons and supernatural monsters exhibit bewildering diversity, as if nature itself enjoyed shrouding their true power in mystery. Among these anomalies, a few are even rumored to rival tiger-level threats. These beings often possess astonishing supernatural powers, everything from fire manipulation to storm summoning. Alongside them, legions of weaker wolf and dog-level creatures have emerged. Though they lack the raw strength of tiger-level monsters, they still pose a serious threat to humans. And we mustn't overlook the paper-level entities, physically frail, yet armed with bizarre, hard-to-counter tricks. The sudden arrival of these monsters has vastly broadened the spectrum of known supernatural life. Their unique abilities and behaviors provide scientists with invaluable research material. Until now, humanity's grasp of the paranormal was confined mostly to legend and myth. The real, tangible presence of these creatures finally allows researchers to probe the nature of their powers through rigorous scientific methods. Faced with this unprecedented threat, governments and military forces quickly regrouped. Once the initial panic subsided, they revised their tactics and launched coordinated programs to capture and study these extraordinary beings. Compared with the unknown and dangerous tissues harvested from the Ghidorah subspecies, the monsters now under study offered far safer research specimens. Using cutting-edge technology, scientists performed in-depth analyses on these creatures, gradually peeling back the layers concealing the source of their supernatural abilities. What they discovered was remarkable. Each monster harbored a unique energy matrix in its physiology, an internal structure that not only granted extraordinary powers, but also conferred a degree of resistance to both physical and magical assaults. Eager to put these discoveries to practical use, researchers devised a method for isolating and extracting the essence of these energy matrices. Their efforts culminated in the creation of the first generation of supernatural elixirs. This breakthrough represented a watershed in the study of paranormal phenomena. When administered, the elixir temporarily rewired the human body, shattering its natural limits and bestowing users with vastly enhanced strength, speed, and endurance. Once word of these potions spread, they became the most sought-after commodities on the planet. Governments and military agencies alike raced to secure supplies, each intent on leveraging this new edge in power. What had begun as a cautious scientific inquiry into monstrous biology had suddenly ignited a global competition, one whose stakes would shape the future of warfare, security, and the very nature of human capability. Ethan understood that cracking the secret of supernatural potions wouldn't just be a personal breakthrough. It had the potential to upend the balance of power across the entire nation. Imagine an army fueled by elixirs that enhance strength, speed, or resilience beyond human limits. Such a force would be all but invincible. But the path to harnessing these potions was anything but straightforward. Every monster they studied offered a different set of traits, and some of those traits were so bizarre that they could backfire spectacularly. Take the Shadow Charm, for instance. To the naked eye, it seemed harmless. Its physical strength was barely more than a wisp of paper, yet it possessed an uncanny mastery over darkness. It could meld seamlessly into shadows, vanish from sight, and strike its enemies without warning. A single misstep in extracting or stabilizing its essence could unleash chaos. As Ethan watched the research team pore over data and containment protocols, he knew they were walking a tightrope. One wrong calculation, one overlooked variable, and the promise of an unstoppable new weapon could turn into a catastrophe of their own making. Chapter 1131. Exorcist Girl. Kasumigaoka, Utah. Across the globe, governments and military agencies are locked in a ruthless race to control the supernatural. One of the most feared entities is the Life Eater, a creature that grows stronger by feeding on its victims' fear and despair, often forcing opponents into psychological collapse long before they can strike a physical blow. The human toll is staggering, yet the rewards are irresistible. The potions distilled from these powers now fetch around $100 million apiece, and even at that price, they remain virtually priceless. The United States, and a leading island nation, have established themselves as the world's foremost paranormal research powers. They hoard every vial of supernatural elixir they produce, unwilling to share or sell to any outside party. Perched atop the ancient celestial temple, exorcist Yuta Kasumigaoka gazed down through drifting clouds at the shattered remains of Tokyo. Once a flourishing metropolis, the city now lay in ruins, its streets deserted, its towering skyline fractured. A bittersweet smile curved Yutaha's lips as she surveyed the devastation below. Her heart caught between a sense of mournful loss and the grim satisfaction of hard-won victory. Looking back on the moment she first met Ethan, it felt like fate's gentle hand had pulled her back from the brink of an endless abyss. Without that chance encounter, she might have become prey to the demons and monsters now roaming Tokyo's streets, just another tragic footnote in the city's downfall. She remembered Tokyo as a vibrant metropolis, alive with celebrations and crowded thoroughfares. Now, it had become a nightmare landscape, overrun by demons and ghosts, its people gripped by sheer panic. Since Ghidorah's cataclysmic assault, Tokyo seems cursed. Creatures drawn from ancient legend and unspeakable nightmares have erupted from the ruins, prowling without mercy in search of their next victim. In the wake of this disaster, the city's population has collapsed to fewer than 9 million. The survivors flit through the streets like frightened birds, endlessly searching for any escape from this city of death. On the surface, both the island government and the United States claimed they'd sent troops to contain the rampaging creatures and rescue civilians. In reality, though, neither force was driven by genuine concern for human life. They were far more interested in exploiting the supernatural powers these monsters possessed. The island's military could at least offer its citizens some measure of protection, but the Americans were utterly consumed by their fanatical pursuit of paranormal abilities, treating human lives as little more than collateral. Over here, a whole pack of slime-level monsters. A dark-skinned American soldier, gripping a sleek, high-tech rifle, bellowed to his nearby squad mates. In the U.S. forces, troops had begun borrowing video game jargon, slime level, goblin level, and so on, to rank their bizarre adversaries. Confronted with the unknown, these labels gave them a comforting sense of order and control. Official U.S. documents still adhered to a 4-tier scale, E, F, D, which roughly mirrored the island nation's own paper, dog, and other colloquial categories. Ethan looked over the 3 4-tiered classification schemes, Tiger, Wolf, and Echo, each operating independently yet deeply intertwined. He couldn't have cared less about their official names or rigid hierarchies. He much preferred the handful of informal labels soldiers had slapped onto them, names like Slime Grade, Omega Class, and Phantom Tier, which, to him, were far more colorful, playful, and memorable. As reports of supernatural phenomena multiplied and agents imbued with otherworldly powers began to appear, a new craze took hold of the U.S. military. In previous decades, petroleum had been the lifeblood fueling America's armed forces. Now it was supernatural energy that drove them forward. Troops eagerly volunteered for deployment wherever rumors swirled of strange, creatures lurking, haunted forests in the Pacific Northwest, abandoned missile silos in the Rockies, even remote outposts in Alaska's frozen wastes. They craved the glory of first contact and the promise of battlefield merit stamps, rewards that could be exchanged for rare potions or serums said to amplify strength, speed, or even grant the kinds of abilities that would let a man transcend his mortality, just as Ethan had once dreamed. Across the ocean, the island nation's self-defense forces found themselves helpless against these uncanny threats. Standard training, conventional weaponry, even decades of strategic planning offered no defense when an entire platoon could be swallowed by a shadow beast in seconds. Under intense public pressure and fearing a full-scale supernatural incursion, their government unveiled sweeping military reforms. New units would be formed, their soldiers equipped with cutting-edge ethereal detection gear and officers forced to learn the U.S. classification systems tiger, wolf, and echo, backward and forward. It was the only way, they believed, to stand a chance in a world where monsters walked at night and men hungered for power beyond human limits. Drawing on America's experience and combining it with the rank structure Ethan had proposed, the government rolled out a bold new incentive program. Serve in the self-defense forces, and if you distinguish yourself with outstanding military exploits and exemplary conduct, you may earn the right to receive a potion of supernatural power. The promise of superhuman ability proved irresistible. Young men and women enlisted by the thousands, drawn by the chance to transcend ordinary limits. Within weeks, recruitment levels soared to record highs, and the chronic shortage of soldiers in the self-defense forces was finally resolved. Yet the miracle potion came at a steep price. Its rarity and potency made it a focal point of international rivalry. As the principal powers in supernatural research, both the United States and the island nation guarded their potion stocks as classified state secrets, strictly regulating transfers even within their own borders. Only the most elite warriors, those whose valor and skill had been unquestionably proven, ever received a dose. Now, at the foot of Ethan's Tiangong Temple, tens of thousands of hopefuls have assembled. Some are refugees who fled the devastation of Tokyo and now seek sanctuary. Others are driven by ambition, eager to pledge themselves to the temple and earn their chance at the supernatural gift. All of them stand united by the same spark of longing, the desire to rise above the ordinary and lay claim to power beyond imagining. They couldn't get anywhere near the celestial temple. An invisible barrier of air cut off their advance, forcing everyone to wait where they stood. By now, Ethan's fame was truly global. Thanks to the live broadcast by the Konoha Hashirama reporter, the whole world recognized his face. He had single-handedly slain Ghidorah, a so-called S-class dragon that even the U.S. military labeled Alpha Dragon. In military parlance, ogre-class monsters were already as destructive as a battalion of tanks. Dragon-class threats could level an entire modern city. Yet Ethan had defeated one all by himself. In response, people had crowned him God tier, even calling him the God of the World. Beside him, Kasumigaoka Shiyu felt as if she were on the brink of transcendence. No longer the quiet, bookish girl she once was, she was pouring every ounce of herself into cultivating her spirit power. She dreamed of becoming an exorcist, a world-saving demon slayer, someone worthy to fight alongside Ethan. He'd told her she had exceptional spiritual potential. So far, she had only managed to condense her spirit energy, but she was determined to rise higher. Despite the blessing of spiritual energy, Ethan's strength barely matched that of a common slime. In battles of the supernatural, raw reserves of spiritual power decide the victor, and he simply didn't have enough. Any other magic he could muster LD only serve as a minor reinforcement, never a game-changer. Chapter 1132, Tokyo Hunting Ground. Tokyo, once the throbbing heart of international commerce and culture, had been transformed into a tense war zone under the cover of night. A heavy hush lay over the city's skyline, its familiar contours swallowed by darkness. Streetlights flickered. The distant roar of passing cars was the only hint of the metropolis that used to be. Drawn by rumors of hidden treasures and unspeakable dangers, mercenaries, covert operatives, and thrill-seekers alike poured into what was now being called the supernatural battlefield. Here, power brokers from every corner of the globe jostled for position. The most formidable among them were the American conglomerates and the secretive island consortiums, whose vast resources and intricate networks had effectively claimed control of the conflict. Any faction lacking ties to these two heavyweights found itself sidelined, their hopes of spoils as good as dead. In Tokyo's new reality, without a powerful backer to call your own, you didn't just lose, you quite literally risked losing your life. And so, under the cover of darkness, the world's hidden forces closed in on this fractured city, each vying to stake their claim on the spoils of the hunt. They're all bound, openly or in secret, to American interests and those of the island nation. Even the deadliest soldier can't stake a claim on this battleground without powerful backers. Major private armies now serve as the enforcers for U.S. conglomerates and island consortiums, carrying out assignments no government can acknowledge. In an industry defined by blood and profit, mercenaries have become the front line of this extraordinary conflict. Among them, walk warriors who've lost everything to war, and men and women willing to do anything for the right price. Right now, each recruit is undergoing exhaustive identity checks, document inspections, fingerprint scans, even iris recognition, to make certain no imposter or enemy spy slips in. A heavily built mercenary in camouflage and mirrored sunglasses scrolls through an electronic dossier, then sneers. ID confirmed. Name, Jack Reynolds. Nationality, British, affiliated with the Black Hawk Group. Beside him, Emily DuPont, her French accent clipped and precise, watches the lineup with a hawk's vigilance, refusing to let even the smallest detail escape her notice. Fingerprint analysis confirmed that Emily DuPont, once a feared operative of the French Foreign Legion, had resurfaced as a top-tier mercenary with the Cheetah Unit. Beyond the island nation's seemingly bulwarked yet fragile defenses lay an entirely different world, a battlefield scarred by conflict and steeped in menace. Every inch of ground appeared corroded by an unseen force, and the air carried a faint, acrid blend of saltwater, burning flesh, and gunpowder. In the distance, the sky flickered with unnatural light, residual flashes from past skirmishes, and grim omens of fresh bloodshed to come. Here, the Foreign Legion strode through the ruins like wraiths. Comprised of hand-picked combat veterans from every corner of the globe, they answered to no flag but their own contracts, and the fat paychecks that sealed them. Bound by neither country nor creed, their sole loyalty was to the highest bidder. In this war-scorched land, legionnaires moved silently among shattered buildings and twisted metal, executing high-risk, high-reward missions with ghost-like precision. For their employers, each soldier's life and death is nothing more than a line item in a ledger. They don't owe them compensation, and they certainly aren't concerned about public opinion. In that world, even betraying a comrade is viewed as a desperate, no-win choice for survival, utterly devoid of moral weight. Yet beneath this ordinary combat facade lies something altogether different. This time, the Foreign Legion isn't hunting conventional enemies, but creatures born of ancient myth and warped by unknown energies. Some are draconic beasts soaring overhead, their molten breath scorching all in its path. Others flit through the shadows like ghosts slipping past any guard. Their strength and speed dwarf those of human warriors, making them the ultimate terror on the battlefield. And their value is beyond measure. Capturing a live specimen can earn a reward dozens of times greater than a standard mission bounty, a prize that sets every soldier's blood racing. Ethan Reynolds stood tall and broad-shouldered, every inch the seasoned warrior, yet in his eyes danced a dangerous mix of greed and fear. He'd witnessed countless marvels on this forsaken battlefield, creatures beyond imagination, but the thought of capturing even one living demon sent his pulse racing. He told himself that if he could haul in just a handful of these priceless monstrosities, he'd never worry about food or shelter again. He'd be rich beyond his wildest dreams. But the battlefield was more merciless than his daydreams. Demons weren't just powerful, they were cunning. They melted into the ruined cityscape, used hidden traps to shake off pursuers, and even mimicked human voices and faces to lure hunters into confusion. Above all, the terrain itself was a killer. Crumbling buildings loomed like jagged knives, shattered roadways opened into death traps, and one careless step could spell doom. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing down his unease. If he wanted to turn his secret vow into reality, he'd have to outthink and outfight every demon, and survive the battlefield's own lethal tricks. Only then could he hope to claim the bounty that gnawed at his ambitions. At first light, Ethan and the rest of the Foreign Legion sat around the shattered remains of an ancient ruin, sharing the last of their meager rations. Cold dawn wind nipped at their faces, and a hush lay over the group, until a sudden, piercing alarm shattered the stillness. Heads snapped upward as a surveillance drone hovered into view, its belly aglow with pulsing red warning lights. The team's technicians sprang into action, tapping commands on their wrist consoles. Within seconds, a clear message scrolled across their displays. Slime-class monster detected at 10 o'clock. Ethan's pulse spiked. He and his squadmates broke into formation, weapons at the ready. Through the crumbling pillars and toppled stones, a small shape crawled into sight, barely larger than a human skull. 8 slender legs carried it forward, each joint bending with eerie precision. A long, whip-thin tail swept aside loose rubble, while twin sacs protruded grotesquely from its pale, mottled carapace. It moved in absolute silence, as if grown from the shadows themselves. "It's a face-hugger," Mara called out, her voice steady despite the alarm in her eyes, the name they'd given this nightmare creature. Ethan felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The horror he'd only ever heard whispered about was now real, and closing in fast. Although it's officially ranked only at the slime threat level, don't be deceived by its unassuming form. This creature is a relentless parasite. The moment it makes contact with a human, it clamps onto the face, plunges its needle-sharp proboscis into the mouth, and injects its eggs. Its blood is a potent acid, capable not only of dissolving flesh, but even corroding metal. In short, once a face-hugger gets you, your chances of survival are virtually zero. Chapter 1133, God confronted by the sudden threat, Ethan and his Foreign Legion team moved with military precision. Each man was outfitted in reinforced tactical gear and a full-face gas mask, standard issue against potential biochemical hazards. In the dim light of the abandoned hangar, they looked every bit the cold, efficient strike force they'd been trained to be. Ethan tapped his comms earpiece once, and the squad split into two detachments exactly as they'd drilled. Team Alpha, tasked with diversion, readied flash grenades and smoke canisters in their gloved hands. Their job was simple: dazzle and disorient the creature long enough for Team Bravo to strike from behind. Bravo's shooters, rifles zeroed and silencers engaged, melted into the shadows, waiting for their opening. Moving with deliberate caution, Alpha advanced first. Ethan could feel his pulse quicken as he edged closer to the hulking silhouette of the facehugger, an alien behemoth whose very name set nerves on edge. With each step, he lobbed a low-yield smoke bomb just past the creature's flank. A thick gray cloud billowed out, obscuring its vision. At his signal, another operator detonated a strobe flash to compound the confusion. But the facehugger was no mindless beast. Its chitinous head snapped around, sensing the feint in an instant. With a roar that rattled the rafters, it sprang forward, muscle and sinew coiling like a living slingshot. In the next heartbeat, it was airborne, hurtling toward one of Ethan's teammates as surely as an arrow from a bow. "Contact!" Ethan yelled, diving to the side as Bravo opened fire. Muzzle flashes cracked through smoke and shadows. This was it, the moment when planning met raw, unpredictable violence. And Ethan knew that only flawless execution would see them through to the next breath. Ethan's instincts, honed by years of frontline deployments, kicked in the moment the facehugger lunged. He slid sideways, narrowly evading the creature's deadly grasp. One direct strike from that alien horror could be catastrophic. Its coagulated acid blood ate through armor and suits in seconds and then seeped into any exposed tissue, burning from the inside out. A standard gas mask offered no real protection. The filters would dissolve almost instantly. But the facehugger wasn't deterred. With feline agility, it twisted on the spot and bounded toward Corporal Mason, hissing as it closed in. Almost as if it understood their every move, it darted along the squad's perimeter, seeking a gap in their defenses. Reacting in unison, the mercenaries formed a tight skirmish line, boots scraping on grated decking as they anchored their positions. Rifles raised, they became a living wall, disciplined, alert, and ready. "Stun rounds are useless," Captain Rhodes barked over the comm. "Its blood neutralizes the sedative. Switch to live ammunition, steel-jacketed only." On his command, a thunderous fusillade erupted. In the narrow, echoing corridors of the derelict station, automatic rifle fire hammered the bulkheads, spent casings clattering to the floor like raindrops. Ethan's team opened fire in unison, each mercenary's shot ringing out like thunder as bullets tore into the writhing facehugger. These operatives were among the best. Every trajectory had been calculated in advance. Under their relentless crossfire, the creature's body split in two, spurting thick emerald blood in a foul arc. A sharp, sour stench immediately filled the air. In that instant, every ounce of fear and tension evaporated, replaced by the sweet rush of triumph. $100,000 in the bank, one of the team members whooped, slapping the butt of his rifle. Ethan nodded, allowing himself the barest smile before signaling his men to move in. They approached the shattered remains with practiced caution, each step measured. Under Ethan's watchful eye, the mercenaries transferred the corpse into a high-security biocontainment unit. The device hissed as its cooling system kicked in, ready to stabilize whatever residual supernatural energy lingered in the ollie and tissue. Every motion was precise. Any slip could compromise the seal and unleash uncontrollable forces. Once the final clamps clicked shut, Ethan exhaled and raised his fist. One by one, the others joined in, their gloved hands meeting in a solid bump. Victory tasted every bit as sweet as the price tag promised. One of the team's most seasoned operatives let out a slow, relieved exhale. Honestly, compared to Bahamut, Iraq, or the Amazon, this feels like a Sunday stroll. His voice carried the memory of those brutal assignments, missions fought in a storm of gunfire, where every second was a gamble with death. Back then, hauling in 100 grand meant diving headlong into a swamp of uncertainty. From the moment they accepted a contract, they were on edge, every step shadowed by unseen threats. They would tail a target around the clock, slipping through damp, unlit alleys and setting up ambushes in cramped street corners for the slightest hint of a lead. Sometimes they even had to escort clients deep into uncharted terrain, places so remote they didn't appear on any map, where unknown beasts prowled and human treachery waited in the darkness. Each job was a life-or-death test, he continued, and any one of them could have been your last breath. No wonder casualties among mercenaries ran so high. Still, there was never a shortage of fresh recruits ready to take their place. Compared to all that, this job, even with its risks, felt almost comfortable. Ethan tightened his grip on the cooler as the drone's rotors whirred to life. In this world teeming with both dangers and opportunities, there were always those bold or desperate enough to risk everything for profit. The drone lifted off slowly, bearing away the facehugger specimens chilled inside the container. It was a race against the clock. Researchers had discovered that the supernatural energy woven through demons and monsters drained away at an alarming rate. Beyond 12 hours, that energy vanished entirely, leaving nothing but useless, rotting flesh. If they didn't recover the creatures and extract their essence in time, all their efforts and their pay would go to waste. Ethan glanced skyward. Is that? Other mercenaries paused and tilted their heads. Far above the shifting mist, a vast structure hovered, the legendary Tiangong Temple. Its lofty halls were carved from crystalline jade and pearl, each surface glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. Wisps of cloud curled around its foundations, as though the palace sat in the heart of heaven itself. God, a dozen voices broke into awed whispers. None dared believe their eyes at first. Tiangong Temple, the celestial palace, had long been the stuff of myth, yet there it floated, more magnificent and mysterious than any tale had ever described. Ethan felt his heart pound. Recovering those facehugger specimens was vital. But catching a glimpse of the celestial palace? That was something else entirely. Here, amid the swirling mists and the hum of rotor blades, destiny was calling. Ethan, now worshipped as the god of the human world, has become a household name ever since he single-handedly slew the dragon and shattered the monstrous grip over Tokyo. Broadcast live around the globe, his miraculous display of power descended upon the city like divine intervention, saving countless innocent lives. The mercenary squad, still trembling with awe, addresses him simply as God. Even their once forbidden passage into Tokyo, sealed by arcane forces, was granted at Ethan's command. "Thank you, God," they chant, lowering their heads in devout gratitude. Abruptly, the drone overhead screeched an alarm. Tasked with monitoring the devastated expanse, its advanced optics detect the eerie movements of demons and mutant creatures, beings whose unpredictable abilities can elude ordinary infrared or night vision gear. From its bird's-eye view, the Todai-engineered drone relays every shift in the ruined streets below. Thanks to cutting-edge technology developed at Todai University and purchased in vast quantities by the United States, and the island nation, thousands of these drones now swarm the skies above Tokyo, keeping the entire battlefield under constant, unblinking watch. Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like me to revise? Once I have the complete passage, I'll rename Luther to Ethan, ensure he's clearly male, and rewrite it into smooth, idiomatic English. Chapter 1134. Alien Ethan's squad moved like a well-oiled machine through the ruined cityscape. A handful of mercenaries trailed behind, collecting and securing the bodies of defeated demons and monsters. A second team monitored seismic shifts, toxic gas pockets, and electromagnetic anomalies in the environment. The rest formed a protective ring around Ethan, weapons at the ready, high-caliber rifles, pulse guns, and grenade launchers primed for anything that crawled out of the shadows. Thanks to Dongda Corporation's emergency mobilization, hundreds of drone assembly lines were running around the clock. Recon drones, attack drones, recovery drones, there wasn't a single job in this war that a robot couldn't help with. Ethan tapped a control pad, switching to a live feed from overhead. For a moment, all he saw was rubble and flickering fires. Then a shape materialized. A slender creature, its body sheathed in glossy black plating, burst into view. It moved with inhuman grace, its limbs folding and unfolding like the legs of some predatory insect. The drone's image stabilized just long enough for a veteran merc to murmur, "Alien." The word hung in the air. Another soldier, his voice tight with urgency, added, "Goblin-class monster. This is bad, real bad." Ethan didn't need confirmation. These aliens were infamous, distant kin to the facehugger, but far more advanced. Their life cycle was a labyrinth of parasitic phases and brutal metamorphoses, and their survival instincts bordered on the supernatural. "Hold positions," Ethan ordered, raising his rifle. "Deploy suppressor drones. Prepare to engage on my mark." He glanced at the others, steel in his eyes. "Let's remind this thing why humans aren't its prey." As the black-armored alien let out a sound somewhere between a hiss and a screech, Ethan's squad braced for the strike. In a war where every advantage counted, they had none to spare, but they had each other. And that, he knew, was enough. Chapter 3. The Anatomy of Terror. Ethan stared at the holoscreen in the dimly lit lab, his heart pounding as he replayed the footage for the 100th time. The creature known as a facehugger descended upon its victim with terrifying precision. In a single lightning-fast motion, its bony legs clamped around the host's head, its proboscis forcing open mouth and throat. Ethan flinched as the camera caught the moment the alien embryo shot down the victim's windpipe, embedding itself in the host's chest. Within hours, the parasite had siphoned off the host's life energy, growing with ruthless efficiency. And at the peak of its development, just when the host was barely clinging to life, the embryo erupted from the ribcage in a spray of blood and bone, a newborn xenomorph hissing into the world. This cruel reproductive cycle only accounts for the first phase of the xenomorph threat. Ethan tapped a command on his console, bringing up volumetric scans of a captured specimen's bloodstream. Once implanted, he muttered to himself, the creature doesn't just grow, it assimilates. Alien enzymes break down the host's tissues, fragment by fragment, rewriting its genetic code. Over days, the host's original biology is overwritten, its consciousness extinguished to serve the hive. It's genetic vandalism on an unprecedented scale, Ethan whispered. No organism is safe. Mammal, avian, reptile, even arthropod. Any creature can become a vessel. He switched to skeletal imaging. High-resolution X-rays revealed an even more unsettling truth. The xenomorph's real masterstroke lies in its bone structure. Unlike any known life form, its skeleton constantly reconfigures to match and improve upon its host's frame. Feather-light hollow bones from a bird, thick, protective plating of a reptile, the spindly joint complex of an insect. The alien doesn't merely mimic these forms, it fortifies them, creating a perfect, hyper-adapted soldier. They evolve on the fly, Ethan noted grimly. Every host makes them faster, stronger, deadlier. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he compiled his report R command. He knew that once this data went public, panic would sweep through every human colony. But he also understood that knowledge was their only weapon. If they could anticipate how the alien adapted, maybe, just maybe, they could develop countermeasures. We're racing against a predator that can out-engineer us from the inside out, he wrote. Our survival depends on cracking the secret of their genetic rewrite before the next facehugger strikes. He powered down the holoscreen and exhaled slowly. The lab fell silent, except for the distant hum of life support generators. Ethan knew the coming days would be critical. With every second he delayed, another xenomorph could emerge, stronger, smarter, more lethal than ever. And somewhere out there, in the shadows of abandoned colonies or drifting ships, waiting for its next host, a facehugger lay in ambush. This alien species demonstrates astonishing adaptability and survival skills across any environment. Most unsettling of all is its siliconized outer skin, which hardens into an almost impenetrable shell. This armor not only grants exceptional defense, but also superb stealth. Because silicon doesn't conduct heat, the creatures emit virtually no thermal signature, rendering night vision and infrared scanners useless. They become ghost-like predators, gliding silently toward their prey before delivering a swift, fatal strike. Conventional human weapons, guns, stun batons, even high-voltage shocks prove nearly worthless against them. Bullets glance off their shell, and explosion shockwaves leave only shallow fissures. Extreme temperatures, scorching heat or frigid cold can momentarily hamper them, but the damage is never enough to be truly crippling. Within moments, they recover and rejoin the hunt. Still, despite their fearsome resilience, these aliens are not without vulnerabilities. Proof that every armor, however mighty, has its chinks. Ethan stared at the holodisplay, reviewing the field reports one more time. After countless experiments and frontline observations, researchers finally agreed on one grim truth. The alien's most vulnerable spot is the skull itself. A thin, translucent layer of ossified skin shields their heads, but if you strike it with enough force, you can stun them or even kill them outright. The problem is getting that shot. These creatures move like phantoms, swift, silent, deadly. In the blink of an eye, they're on you, their razor-sharp claws slicing through steel and bone. And even when a headshot lands true, their extraordinary regenerative powers kick in within minutes. Fractured skulls knit back together, torn muscle and sinew reweave themselves until nothing remains of the injury but a faint scar. Watching that healing process in real time is enough to turn your stomach. That makes one-shot kills an almost suicidal gamble. Even the most battle-hardened mercenaries, those who faced horrors no civilian will ever comprehend, struggle to keep their nerves steady when one of these things lunges at them. Since Tokyo fell, the city has been reduced to rubble and ash. Once teeming streets lie silent under a thick pall of dust. What little light remains is tainted by smoke and the distant glow of fires that never seem to burn out. In this new world, survival is a daily war. Squads of hired guns patrol the ruins, trading gunfire and grenades with demons that prowl the shadowed alleys. Ethan sighed, holstering his rifle. He knew the odds. He knew every mission could be his last. But someone had to stand between these monsters and what was left of humanity. And as long as he drew breath, he'd keep fighting. Because if the survivors ever lost hope, then all of them were already dead. Ethan's squad wove their transports through the shattered cityscape, moving from one crumbling block to the next. Every day, more than 10,000 mercenaries fell to the alien onslaught, and that terrible tally kept climbing as if there were no end in sight. The ruins themselves seemed to breathe with death. "Where's the heavy machine gun?" one of the fighters called D out, his voice cracking against the hollow shells of buildings stripped bare by flame and bombardment. They hadn't come unprepared. Every soldier carried heavy weapons, miniguns, rocket launchers, anti-material sniper rifles. In this fight, those guns were the only things standing between them and oblivion. A thunderous staccato suddenly erupted overhead. Ethan glanced up as the squad's minigunner tore into the air, bullets spitting like a furious hailstorm toward a massive alien prowling the ruined street below. But the creature's carapace was like nothing they'd ever encountered, harder than forged steel. Even the minigun's bark barely left a scratch. Worse still, the alien moved with jaw-dropping speed, closing the distance before anyone could reload. Panic flared in Ethan's chest as he realized how desperately outmatched they were. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as the alien cat sprang forward. In a blur of motion, it drove its claws across a mercenary's throat. Blood spouted in a dark arc, splattering the crumbling stone pillars and dust-choked corridors of the old ruins. "Jesus Christ," Captain Alvarez stammered over the comm, his voice quivering. None of them had ever faced a creature like this. Ethan crouched behind a shattered wall, mind racing. He'd studied reports of parasitic aliens, horrors that hijacked a host's DNA, then perfected it. But this thing had fused itself with a cat. It had inherited every feline reflex, lightning reaction time, uncanny balance, and senses honed for the hunt. Now, amplified by alien biology, it had become the deadliest predator imaginable. Silence fell over the squad. Every man stared, slack-jawed, at the beast's glowing eyes. In that instant, they understood. Escape was unlikely, survival improbable. Ethan swallowed hard. While the others maintained a perimeter, drawing the creature's attention, he crept forward. Finding a narrow choke point between two broken columns, he dropped to one knee and shouldered his rocket launcher. The weapon's weight pressed into his shoulder, cold metal biting through his sweating gear. His finger hovered over the trigger. Sweat beaded at his brow and slid down his cheek, mingling with the dust on his face. This shot, it was their only hope. "Come on," he muttered. He exhaled, steadied his aim, and pressed the trigger. The launcher roared, launching its warhead straight at the alien cat, lighting up the ruins in a thunderous blast that shook the ground and echoed off the ancient stones. Ethan steadied his grip on the rocket launcher, every muscle coiled like a spring. If he missed, he'd be swallowed by endless darkness and death. "Fire!" he roared. A brilliant jet of flame erupted from the barrel as the missile screamed forward, aiming straight for the cat-like alien. But the creature's reflexes outstripped his wildest hopes. With a graceful twist in midair, it slipped cleanly out of the rocket's path. "Damn it!" Ethan snarled, heart pounding. He refused to accept defeat. Chapter 1135, Busuji Maseko versus the Cat Alien. Just as Ethan readied his next strike, the cat alien lunged past him in a blur. Its claws gleamed with cold, lethal intent as it aimed to rend him in two. "Ah!" Ethan screamed, a sound torn from the depths of his terror. The alien's talons pierced his side like paper, and blood spurted out in a crimson arc, staining the ground. He writhed helplessly, fists clenching, legs kicking, but the creature's grip was iron. His strength ebbed away, and he collapsed to his knees, agony and disbelief flooding his eyes. He couldn't believe this was how it ended, at the merciless hands of this beast. "Crossfire! Armor-piercing rounds now!" the captain roared. In an instant, the squad fell into formation, guns raised. Muzzle flashes erupted as bullets whistled toward the cat alien like a sudden downpour. But the creature was astonishingly swift, its lithe form weaving through the incoming hail, barely slowing under the withering barrage. Ethan lay on the ground, every breath a battle. Around him, the firefight raged on, the fate of each soldier hanging by the thread of the next heartbeat. Ethan watched in stunned silence as the alien cat predicted every trajectory, twisting away from each bullet at impossible angles. Under the hail of gunfire, it moved with the grace of a dancer, dodging lethal shots as if they were part of some deadly choreography. Within moments, the towering feline had darted past the mercenaries' front line. With a powerful sweep of its arm, it unleashed a shockwave that sent one stunned soldier flying like a broken puppet. The man traced a sorrowful arc through the air before crashing to the ground with a hollow thud. Ethan could tell at once that the mercenaries' injuries were mortal. "Damn you!" the black-clad captain roared, his eyes blazing with fury and desperation. He discarded his automatic rifle and yanked a grenade from his belt. With no other options left, he planned to trade his life for even the slightest chance of victory. But just as he brought his hand to the grenade's pin, expecting the alien's claws to strike him down first, nothing happened. The feline warrior didn't move. Silence crackled between man and monster, each waiting for the other's next move. The cat alien's tail lashed out like a living whip, piercing the captain's chest in a heartbeat. He let out a strangled cry as searing pain exploded through his torso. His eyes went blank and unfocused, and he crumpled to the ground, utterly spent. The grenade slipped from his grasp and detonated a moment later, but the beast had already darted clear of the blast, emerging completely unscathed. The shockwave rattled across the field, stirring up a haze of smoke and gunpowder. The mercenaries stood frozen, horror-stricken. Once the most battle-hardened fighters on the planet, they now felt small and helpless before this lethal creature. One by one, several of their comrades fell to the cat alien's swift, brutal onslaught. Suddenly the beast froze, its ears pricking toward the edge of the clearing, as if it had caught an unfamiliar scent. A clear, melodic voice cut through the haze. Impressive. It was pleasant to hear, until a subtle chill laced each word. The cat alien's posture snapped taut, ready to pounce at an instant's notice. From the shadows at the forest's rim stepped a young woman of striking beauty, her gaze cool and unflinching. She lingered at the boundary of light and darkness, watching both beast and mercenaries with an unreadable expression. Saiko Busujima stood in the temple courtyard, dressed in her simple training uniform. Her long purple hair was pulled into a high ponytail that cascaded to her waist like a waterfall. In her hand she gripped a freshly honed sword whose blade gleamed with cold light, as if it hungered for blood and death. Among her peers, Kasumigaoka Utaha and Hiratsuka Shizuka, Saiko's progress had been the fastest, so rapid in fact that she was already ready to take the field. She owed her leap in skill to Ethan, who had first explained the wonders of spiritual power, a mystical force that, when channeled into weapons and bodies alike, could transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. A common knife infused with enough spiritual energy could cleave iron. A mere novice could, in time, stand toe-to-toe with a veteran warrior. Saiko had taken that lesson to heart. She borrowed a training blade from the temple armory and spent day after day, night after night, honing her technique. With every monster she vanquished, she could feel her sword growing keener, her strikes surer, and her own body stronger. Although she still rated herself at no more than a solid paper level of power, the thrill of the hunt stoked a fire in her veins. Today, she would put her skills to the test against the strange cat-like alien that had been spotted on the outskirts of town. Her eyes shone with excitement beneath the moonlight. Finally, she could prove just how far spiritual power could carry a determined warrior. Ethan's opponent was no ordinary creature. It combined raw strength with astonishing speed and cunning. Facing it was the ultimate test of skill. He drew in a steady breath, banished every stray thought, and raised his sword in a deliberate arc. The duel was on. In the next instant, Ethan blurred forward like a swallow in flight. His blade sang through the air, aiming for the alien's sleek neck. But the cat-like creature twisted away, its body rippling with feline grace. Unfazed, Ethan spun on his heel and unleashed a flurry of sweeping strikes, each one carrying enough force to fell a charging beast. Under the relentless assault, the alien staggered back, its eyes flashing red with fury and frustration. With an enraged roar, the creature leapt high, claws outstretched for a killing blow. Ethan, however, had anticipated the move. He slipped aside with a smooth pivot, then drove his sword forward in a lightning-fast counter. The blade sank deep into the alien's flank, and it howled in pain as Ethan held firm, ready for whatever came next in this fierce, unyielding duel. Saiko Busujima's blade sang through the air, slicing the cat-like alien's abdomen in one clean arc. The creature shrieked, twisting midair to evade a second blow, but its wound was mortal. A torrent of corrosive blood gushed out, hissing against the concrete and sending white vapors spiraling skyward. With a furious roar, it fixed its glowing green eyes on Saiko, as if determined to tear her apart. Saiko held her stance, her spirit-forged sword unwavering in her grip. Not a drop of the alien's acid could scar its blade. Reinforced by her own spiritual energy, the weapon burned away every trace of the toxic fluid. She swallowed hard. Watching an alien on the parade ground was one thing. Facing it blade to claw was entirely different. Saiko had slain invaders before. She was renowned as one of the island nation's 3 witches, even lauded by some as a goddess. Yet this cat alien moved with terrifying speed, its claws sharper than any steel. Her enhanced body could shrug off blows ordinary soldiers couldn't, and her sword could shatter the beast's defenses, but sheer force alone wouldn't guarantee the kill. As the creature lunged again, fangs bared and claws extended, Saiko braced herself. She had one chance to end this, and she intended to seize it. Chapter 1136, Justice. In an age brimming with mysteries and miracles, all eyes turned to Saiko Dokujima and her companions. Envy, desire, even jealousy bubble under the surface as people imagine how marvelous it would be to walk in Saiko's footsteps. After all, beauty and charisma alone don't guarantee a stage. Though countless women rival her in looks, fate has not bestowed upon them the same spotlight and opportunities. Today, a vast satellite network, spanning this island nation to the United States, forms an invisible web that cloaks every inch of Tokyo's skies. From high above, no subtle movement in the city escapes observation, and yet, nestled beneath that vigilant canopy lies a secret haven, Tiangong Temple. Like a lonely island at the edge of the world, it stands aloof from the bustle below. Here resides Ethan, worshipped by many as the god of the world. Ethan's power overshadowed any modern technology. Satellite surveillance and drone incursions alike ground to a halt at the invisible air barrier surrounding the Tiangong Temple, as if an unbreachable veil separated the profane world from the sacred. Then Seiko Dokujima appeared. Her arrival was like a stone dropped into a tranquil pond, sending ripples through every corner of the global monitoring network. The instant a drone captured her silhouette, alarms sounded across intelligence agencies everywhere. "It's Seiko Dokujima, one of the three goddesses," operators cried out in astonishment. Within moments, satellites and drones swarmed back into position like sharks drawn by blood. Each system locked onto her coordinates, initiating a silent contest for supremacy. On every screen, Seiko moved with lethal grace, her long sword flashing coldly in the sunlight. Across a courtyard scarred by ancient stone, she faced down a bizarre, feline alien whose raw strength could tear steel apart. The alien lunged with blinding speed, its razor-sharp claws slashing through the air. Yet every strike it delivered met Seiko's blade with a precise counter, her footwork so nimble it rendered the creature's power almost clumsy. Backed by Ethan's indomitable force behind the barrier, Seiko Dokujima held the line between two worlds, human and otherworldly, unbroken. Seiko Busujima's blade danced through the air with breathtaking precision. Each swing met the cat-like alien's ferocious assault, parrying its savage strikes, and, in the same motion, leaving deep crimson gashes along its flank. Monitors flickered in the control room as everyone held their breath, then erupted in stunned excitement. For years, the United States and a prominent island nation had poured vast resources into researching supernatural abilities. Their laboratories were filled with captured monsters of every variety, all subjected to elaborate experiments designed to siphon the creature's otherworldly strengths and distill them into a single power-bestowing potion. Scientists believed they could engineer a formula to grant humans true superhuman gifts. But reality fell far short of theory. Time and again, the extracted powers proved elusive or incomplete, hemorrhaging away at the slightest provocation. Even when the researchers used slime tier, paper tier, or F-tier specimens, creatures barely more threatening than vermin, the resulting bruise did nothing more than elevate a person's physicality to the pinnacle of human potential. Test subjects emerged with reflexes, strength, and stamina rivaling world record athletes, but no one ever turned into a superhero. And now, as Seiko stood her ground in that cratered arena, blood-misted moonlight glinting off her blade, every observer realized just how rare true supernatural talent remained. What they were witnessing went far beyond any potion's reach. In the control room, Ethan watched with wide eyes. He'd trained for years, hoping to unlock some hidden spark within himself, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. As Seiko pressed her advantage, forcing the alien to its knees, he felt a tingle of hope and a surge of awe. If she, one human Amber, on countless failures, could wield such power, he clenched his jaw. No more doubts. If true ability existed anywhere, he would find it, and when he did, nothing would stand in his way. To truly transcend human limits and become a superhuman, one must harness materials derived from powerful monsters, goblin level, canine level, E-tier, or even higher. Such resources are perilously rare, which explains why genuine superhumans scarcely ever appear. Seiko Busujima's recent feat, however, has ignited unprecedented excitement among researchers in both nations. Without any known enhancement serums, she stood toe-to-toe with a fearsome alien catbeast and emerged unscathed. Clearly, there was a deeper secret behind her strength. It wasn't long before a single theory took root at the highest levels of government and among the top consortiums. Seiko's astonishing power must stem from direct instruction by the world god, Ethan, within the fabled Temple of Heaven. This rumor detonated like a bomb across the political arena of the island nation and in the boardrooms of powerful corporations. The influential figures, accustomed to operating from the shadows, now wore expressions of unbridled greed and eager anticipation. Night had fallen like a curtain over the island nation, the sky a depth of black so absolute it seemed to swallow even the stars. Inside the cabinet war room, a heavy silence weighed on the assembled ministers. Around a polished mahogany table, their faces glowed in the pale light of overhead lamps, each expression a mirror of ambition and unease. News of Saiko Busujima's extraordinary abilities had reached every corner of the government. If her power's secrets could be unlocked, the military would surge light years ahead of any rival, and the island would claim a godlike status on the world stage. No one doubted that this prize, supernatural prowess distilled into human form, would redraw the global balance of power. A slender man with hawk-sharp eyes rose from the table, his posture taut with determination. This was Minister Asano, the nation's foremost advocate for aggressive research and development. He cleared his throat, and the room fell even quieter. "We cannot afford delay," Asano began, voice steady but fierce. "We must establish contact with Saiko Busujima immediately and secure the source of her power by any means necessary. Every moment we hesitate, our rivals grow closer to achieving what should be our monopoly." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some ministers nodded in agreement, others exchanged wary glances. Outside, the night held its breath, as though the island itself were bracing for the silent conflict that had just begun. Whether we sway her with righteous arguments, leverage the lives of our people as a threat, or dangle high office and fat salaries before her, if it achieves our end, it's on the table. This contest will decide the fate of our nation, and failure is not an option. The words hung heavy in the council chamber. After a brief, tense pause, the majority of ministers nodded in solemn agreement. The few who hesitated quickly fell silent under the weight of consensus. Thus, the careful, behind-the-scenes campaign to bring Saiko Busujima into our fold began in earnest. On the battlefield, Saiko was locked in a brutal duel with the cat-like alien. Claws had scored deep wounds across her body, yet she showed no fear, only a fierce, intoxicating excitement. Each strike of her blade cut deeper than the last, fueled by a wellspring of spiritual power that surged from her core. Driven by raw emotion, that power erupted like a volcano, shaking the very air around her. Every breath she drew seemed to resonate with the world itself, and every swing of her sword tore the atmosphere to shreds. Saiko Busujima savored the rush of battle, indifferent to the risk of fresh scars marring her face or body. The feline alien's regenerative powers rivaled those of any extraterrestrial, shattered limbs knitting back together in minutes, fueled by a metabolism far more efficient than a human's, so no foe-odd was required. After a fierce clash, Saiko executed a precise blood vibration technique, sending the cat alien's corrosive green ichor flicking off her blade and sizzling onto the floor. Chapter 1137, To Save Tokyo. When the green liquid hit the pavement, it hissed on contact, sending tendrils of white vapor spiraling into the air. Saiko Busujima didn't flinch. Her spiritual power flared to form a protective barrier, neutralizing every trace of demonic energy. Spiritual power and demonic force are natural enemies. Like light versus darkness, they cannot coexist. Once you embrace one, you lose all access to the other. Ethan had laid it out clearly for Saiko, Shiu Kasumigaoka, and Shizuka Hiratsuka. Every artificial supernatural in Japan and the United States is fueled by demonic power. But such power comes at an exorbitant price. The stronger you become, the deeper the demonic corruption seeps in, gnawing away at your humanity until you risk transforming into a true monster. Just as Busujima Saiko squared off against the alien cat, a single, thunderous crack split the night. In the very next instant, a supersonic, armor-piercing round from an anti-material sniper rifle streaked across the sky like a meteor. The bullet's velocity was so extreme that even the cat alien, with its lightning-fast reflexes, could only watch it hurtle toward its skull. Bang! The round spun as it struck, detonating its miniature warhead the moment it breached the creature's cranium. A fierce explosion of metal fragments carved out a jagged hole nearly 1/5 the size of the alien's head. The beast let out a bone-shaking roar, its limbs convulsing in agony before it collapsed, life extinguished in a heartbeat. Saiko's eyes snapped instantly to the far ridge where the shot had come from. Though the echo of the gunfire had not yet reached her ears, her honed spiritual senses, her heightened five senses, plus her uncanny sixth sense, inspiration, had already pinpointed the threat. With reflexes equally swift, she pivoted, ready to confront whoever dared to interfere. Saiko's intuitive gift was as baffling as it was formidable. It let her sense the enemy's next move before it happened, uncovering hidden threats in the chaos of battle and shaping the perfect counterstrike. Tonight, a surveillance drone hovered in the darkness, its high-definition camera obsessively tracking every flicker of the operative known as Busujima Psycho. Deep inside the command center, technicians and analysts stared at the live feed, jaws dropping. "The gunshot hasn't even reached her yet, right?" one of them blurted, fingers dancing across his keyboard as he double-checked the timestamps. "Correct," came the reply. "By our calculations, she moved 2 full seconds before the muzzle report arrived." 2 seconds? Another expert whispered in disbelief. Ward-Falk-class reaction speed, or is it some kind of superhearing? How is any of that possible? A visiting analyst, a foreign consultant, swore under his breath. He leaned closer to the monitor, searching Psycho's calm, unreadable expression for answers. If she's really hearing it, then this is beyond anything we've ever recorded. In the silence that followed, the only certainty was that Busujima Seiko was playing by rules no one else understood, and she was always one step ahead. How can humans possibly have hearing this acute? Behind her, the technical analysts and expert teams were locked in a heated debate, scrambling for a scientific explanation that never came. Seiko Busujima's patience wore thin. She had been driven from her focus in the heat of battle. Suddenly, a black armored car slid to a stop before her. The rear door opened, and a tall man stepped out, clad in a reinforced tactical vest that spoke of both authority and strength. His smooth smile contrasted sharply with the tension around them. "Good afternoon, Ms. Busujima. I'm Taro Yamamoto, special correspondent for the Supernatural Countermeasures Agency, directly dispatched by the cabinet." Psycho regarded him coolly, her hand never leaving the hilt of her katana. Though the blade dipped slightly in acknowledgement, she made no move to sheath it. "And what brings the cabinet's envoy to my battlefield?" she asked, her voice as frigid as a winter wind. Yamamoto's smile faded into a serious line. "We, and the entire cabinet, know full well your reputation for strength and cunning, Ms. Busujima. We have a matter of great importance that demands your unique talents. Tokyo, once a thriving metropolis, now teeters on the brink of collapse. Demons and restless spirits roam the streets, and innocent citizens cower behind barricades. At the heart of our last defense line, General Yamamoto Taro's face bore both regret and resolve. We've thrown every conventional strategy at them," he confessed, voice low and urgent. "But Tokyo's defenses are failing. There are gifted fighters among us, but their numbers are few, and most are still learning to harness their powers. They cannot stand alone against this tide. We need a stronger force. And that force is you, Miss Busujima Seiko." Seiko's eyes flickered with surprise, then narrowed in self-doubt. She knew her abilities, knew she was powerful, but also understood that one person, no matter how skilled, could not turn the tide of a city-wide nightmare. "I can't save Tokyo by myself," she said quietly, tone edged with helplessness. "If you're looking for real backup, America, or Ethan, would be your best bet." Taro shook his head, stepping closer, his expression fierce with conviction. "No, Seiko, you're the one who can do this. We believe in you." With the weight of the city resting on her shoulders, Seiko drew a steadying breath. The fate of Tokyo now depended on her answer. "Miss Busujima, please," the man implored, his voice thick with desperation. "The survivors in Tokyo are clinging to hope, and its light is fading fast. Our numbers are stretched beyond breaking, and even our awakened fighters can't hold back what's coming. We beg you, for Tokyo, for our island nation, for all the innocent lives at stake, please help us." Every word he spoke seemed to carry the weight of countless souls. Seiko Busujima regarded him in silence, her calm gaze betraying a flicker of doubt. "Save Tokyo? Save the entire country?" she repeated softly. He swallowed hard. "Yes, Miss Busujima. You have only ever called yourself an ordinary kendo club member, but we've seen you in action. Your swordsmanship is incomparable, and your command of spiritual power nothing short of miraculous." Seiko drew a slow breath, her shoulders easing. "I'm no hero," she said. "If I possess any gift at all, it's not something I chose. It's simply fate." The man's expression softened with sympathy but hardened again with resolve. He leaned forward. "Fate or no, Tokyo needs you now. Will you stand with us? Before you, these demons and monsters are no more formidable than chickens and dogs, easily picked off. Tokyo is in the grip of an unprecedented crisis, and we urgently need someone with your strength to stand up and lead us out of the darkness. Do you want to learn the secret method for cultivating spiritual power? Her tone held a note of genuine inquiry for the first time. Ethan's face remained impassive, but he gave a single, decisive nod. Yes, he said quietly. It's our only hope to save Tokyo. Chapter 1138, Demonic Power. The Grave of the Greedy and Ambitious. Ethan squared his shoulders and met Saiko Busujima's gaze. He spoke with measured intensity. Miss Busujima, the katana you bear and the spiritual energy that courses through you are our greatest assets in the battle against these demons and monsters. The lives of millions in Tokyo hinge on your willingness to fight. As representatives of the National Supernatural Countermeasures Agency, we'll stop at nothing to secure your aid. He paused, letting his words land. When he resumed, his tone grew steely. The directorship of the Supernatural Countermeasures Agency is vacant. We can even push to create a Minister of the Supernatural position in the cabinet, tailor-made for you. Accept, and the entire nation's resources will be at your disposal to repel this catastrophe. Saiko's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, part teasing, part dismissive, as though she'd anticipated every proposal. Is that so? I must truly be indispensable if you've mustered such powers to woo me. Her features were soft, almost serene, but the depth of her dark eyes shimmered with a sharp intelligence. Clearly, Saiko Busujima was no ordinary woman, and Ethan knew all too well the force she could unleash. Saiko Busujima understood all too well that, however sincere her visitors might seem, their motives were far from simple. They coveted more than the razor-sharp blade at her side, or the potent ki that flowed through her veins. They coveted her unique position, the power she held to tip the balance of any conflict. Yet she also knew she lacked the authority to make this decision herself. At this moment, she was nothing more than the personal maid of Ethan, a man whose own mysterious strength and reputation inspired both respect and trepidation. In any age and under any custom, a maid could not bind her lord's will with her own. I'm afraid this isn't mine to decide, she said, her voice calm but unyielding. She inclined her head in a polite bow, maintaining a composed reserve. If you wish to pursue this matter, you must speak directly to my master. I have no right to consent on his behalf. And let me warn you, demonic power, while formidable, is riddled with unknown dangers. Those who tap into it walk a perilous path. Be very certain you're prepared for the consequences. They'll end up as monsters they won't even recognize. With that, Saiko Busujima turned on her heel and walked away. The special envoys dared not stop her. No one was willing to risk offending the power backing her. Recruitment failed, Taro Yamamoto murmured into the tiny microphone clipped to his chest. He knew every syllable was being transmitted live to the higher-ups. Far off, in a dimly lit monitoring room, a cadre of senior officials in dark suits watched the exchange on screen. Their faces were stony, yet their eyes betrayed both disappointment and greed. One of the elders leaned forward, speaking slowly and deliberately. God's maids, huh? It seems their position isn't quite as untouchable as we thought. Still, Yamamoto, this isn't on you. Though meant to reassure, his words carried a deeper admiration for Saiko Busujima's unshakable calm and lucid reasoning. In that silent moment, they all realized that this young woman was no ordinary recruit. The men exchanged uneasy glances. What does she mean by demonic power? One of them finally asked. If we take it at face value, another replied, it's the power of demons and ghosts. They'd employed advanced techniques to study demon remains, extracting compounds that, when formulated into a serum, grant humans extraordinary abilities. Do you think the serum we've developed from these cadavers could actually turn people into demons? Someone ventured. No way. A third man snapped, his voice rising. We've run countless trials. It's safe. He jabbed his own arm to prove it, instinctively trying to reassure both himself and the others. But as his words settled in, they all fell silent, unease spreading through the room. After all, Seva, Errol of their most trusted operatives, and even they themselves, had already received doses of this so-called supernatural drug. Now, they could only wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. Ethan watched the dozen or so well-built men in the dimly lit chamber as their expressions twisted from anticipation to unease. They all knew that the serum they'd just injected would push human physiology to its absolute limits, granting youthfulness, extraordinary strength, and potentially extending life beyond 180 years. Such power was an irresistible temptation. But now they'd learned that this supernatural energy wasn't a miracle elixir at all, but demonic power, a force that, over time, would transform its user into a monster. "Are they trying to pull a fast one on us?" growled Marcus, one of the more prominent figures, clenching his fists. He'd risked everything for this serum, and the thought that it might doom him to a bestial fate enraged him. Ethan stepped forward, calm but firm. "I can't say for certain, but our informant has no reason to deceive us." A ripple of distrust ran through the group. The men instinctively backed away, as if afraid that Marcus, already infused with the serum, might suddenly sprout fangs and lunge for their throats. Roland, his heavy frame still trembling with residual adrenaline, sneered. "All this talk of demon power without any specifics on dosage is just scaremongering. I barely have any of that energy coursing through my veins. If it were truly dangerous, I'd look like a monster by now, wouldn't I?" He stamped his foot and glared at Ethan, but behind his bravado, his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Ethan met his gaze steadily. "That may be true, today, but the serum's effects could take months, even years, to fully manifest. You've all gambled with your humanity for something that may cost you your souls." As silence fell, each man grappled with the choice they'd made: immortality and strength, or the slow loss of everything that made them human. Which outcome awaited them, they could only discover in the days to come. Who can say whether demon power obeys any laws of science? What if its strength only grows the more you rely on it? That's exactly the snare Ethan has prepared. He knows that no tycoon or power broker can resist the lure of true supernatural might. Offer them his demon-infused serum, and in time they'll all be consumed, unless they can cling to a pure sense of justice. Anyone who truly dedicates their power to righteous ends can retain their humanity. Everyone else will ultimately become a demon. But holding fast to that moral compass is far more demanding than it is for those who wield spirit-based abilities, who aren't bound by such a condition. Saiko Busujima left nothing out when she recapped today's events to Ethan. Kasumigaoka Utaha and Shizuka Hiratsuka listened in stunned silence. Then came the final bombshell. The head of the Supernatural Countermeasures Office is himself the newly appointed Minister of the Supernatural in the Cabinet, a full-fledged ministerial post. You can only imagine the power and influence that position carries. Because of this, they were now keenly aware of their responsibilities. Shizuka Hiratsuka's and Kasumigaoka Utaha's parents and other relatives had come to visit, and the two of them had to make sure they welcomed and impressed their guests. Chapter 1139, Supernatural Crisis. Ethan praised Saiko Busujima's performance. Once he gave his approval, Kasumigaoka Shiu and Hiratsuka Shizu descended to the reception hall to meet their families. "Welcome back, Miss Kasumigaoka. Welcome back, Miss Hiratsuka." The special operations officers greeted them with polite smiles. Yet behind those professional facades lay eager curiosity. These agents weren't just here to welcome two distinguished guests. They hoped to glean any scrap of information about the so-called God on Earth from their relatives. After all, anyone connected to a being of such power, no matter the circumstances, might hold clues that could shake the nation, or even the world. Shizu inwardly flinched at being addressed so formally. She still wasn't used to the title, ma'am. Although Ethan had already turned 30, he still exuded a youthful energy that made the formal title Mr. feel almost out of place. But on an occasion like this, he knew it was pointless to quibble over small details. He accepted the honorific with a polite smile and followed Kasumigaoka Shiyu into the appointed meeting room. "I imagine you know what I'm going to ask," Shiyu said, settling gracefully into her chair. "So go ahead." Ethan inclined his head. Across the polished table, Shiyu folded her hands and met his gaze. "I've heard through various channels about the recent changes in your family, particularly your father's sudden promotion. I was both surprised and relieved to learn he's become the company president." Shiyu's voice softened with emotion. "Your father has always been that silent pillar of strength. First out the door each morning, last to return at night. He carried your entire family on his shoulders, endured setback after setback at work, and never complained. This new position is a hard-won reward for him and a wonderful blessing for your family." Ethan appreciated the genuine concern in her words. Drawing in a steady breath, he prepared to share the rest of his story. Now that his father had been promoted, Ethan could sense the subtle shifts in their home life. His dad was around more often, lingering over family dinners and greeting everyone with a broader, more relaxed smile. Yet despite his rise in rank, he remained modest and unassuming, fully aware that every hard-won achievement carried its own burdens and complexities. One evening after dinner, Ethan's mother reached out and gently took his hand. Her voice was soft but resolute. "Ethan, your father is incredibly proud of you and grateful for all you've done. But whatever path you choose from here on, know that we will always support you." Ethan met her steady gaze and nodded. He understood her worry. He also knew that his father's earlier warning wasn't meant to discourage him, but to remind him to stay true to his own goals, no matter what distractions might come his way. Next door, the situation at the Hiratsuka Shizu household felt far more pressured. Shizu's family was anything but ordinary, and their long-standing reputation brought with it relentless demands and a string of disappointments that weighed heavily on her. Shizuka Hiratsuka's disastrous blind date had only heightened her family's anxiety. But everything changed the moment word spread that she'd somehow forged a connection with the mysterious God on Earth. In the eyes of the Hiratsuka elders, that bond brought unprecedented honor and untold possibilities for their lineage. Eager to cement their new link to divinity, the family council convened at once. Subtly at first, they pressed Shizuka to leverage her relationship with this God on Earth. When that failed to produce results, they grew bolder. "If the God requires attendance," an aunt suggested, "we have dozens of impeccable young women ready to serve." The remark left Shizuka mortified and secretly furious at the callousness of it all. Before she could plot her escape, government agents arrived unannounced. Their leader fixed Shizuka and her close friend Kasumi Shiyu with an authoritative gaze. "We understand there's unusual energy at work here," he said. "We need to know everything you can tell us about this so-called demon power." Shiyu and Shizuka exchanged a quick look. Ethan had been clear. They must not divulge the secrets of spiritual cultivation, but they were free to discuss the broader nature of demon power. So Shizuka took a steadying breath and began. She outlined how demon power differed from ordinary spiritual energy, its origins, its unique traits, the dangers it posed when left unchecked. Shiyu supplemented her, describing its patterns in combat and its telltale signs in the environment. The officials listened intently, jotting down notes. As the two young women spoke, they realized that, for better or worse, their clandestine knowledge was now in the hands of those with real authority, and that their lives were about to grow infinitely more complicated. Dr. Albright cleared his throat and addressed the assembled researchers. "We've seen firsthand that demonic energy can grant tremendous power in an instant," he began, "but the cost is steep. Those who tap into it risk a gradual erosion of their humanity. Eventually, they become little more than monsters, and once that process starts, there's no turning back." He paused, letting the warning sink in. By contrast, spiritual energy is the true wellspring of life. Its purifying essence can cleanse demonic corruption and shield a person's soul from further erosion. Despite the clarity of his words, a thick fog of confusion hung over the room. The team had no solid samples of either force, only a handful of hasty observations, and a dangerously naive willingness to brew supernatural potions and inject them into volunteers. Without a clear theoretical framework, they were flying blind. Ethan, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. His voice was calm but urgent. "If spiritual energy truly can purify demonic energy, why don't we enlist someone who wields spiritual power? Let them cleanse the tainted within us." His eyes glinted with hope. "That could be the key to reversing the damage we've already done." Murmurs rippled through the room, but at the head of the table, Dr. Sinclair shook his head firmly. "No," he said flatly. "We cannot assume the cooperation, or even the goodwill, of spiritual practitioners. Besides, we don't know how their power interacts with the mixtures we've created. It's far too risky." And with that, the proposal was dismissed. Disappointment rippled through Ethan's chest, but he kept his expression steady. The path to understanding these forces, both demonic and divine, was still shrouded in darkness, and they had barely begun to light the way. Ethan's idea was immediately dismissed as wishful thinking. After all, everyone capable of wielding spiritual power in this world was either a devoted maid or a follower of the so-called God on Earth, people of the highest social standing. Ordinary power brokers would never be granted an audience with them, let alone persuade them to perform such a deeply personal purification ritual to expel demonic energy from one's body. Meanwhile, word of the demonic energy crisis had reached the United States. Company executives scrambled in panic. They'd already manufactured and begun distributing countless supernatural enhancement serums, potions derived from monsters and demons captured in Tokyo. If these elixirs now proved dangerous, potentially transforming ordinary people into monsters, all their investments and efforts would have been for nothing. Demonic energy? The very substance that turns humans into monsters? One executive whispered, eyes wide with fear. They exchanged haunted looks, none daring to imagine the societal upheaval that would follow if even a handful of those treated with the Tokyo-derived serums began to mutate into demons. The mere thought sent a chill through the highest corridors of American power. Such turmoil isn't merely panic and street riots, it represents a profound breakdown in social trust. People will begin to doubt science, question the government, and challenge the very rules and structures they once took for granted. Media coverage will grow relentless, social feeds will flood with opinions and outrage, and everyone will demand some explanation to calm their nerves. No matter how the authorities respond, they will face an unprecedented deficit of trust, one far more daunting than any economic crisis. Chapter 1140, International Reactions. More importantly, a groundbreaking economic model has just emerged, the supernatural economy. Built on the study and application of these mysterious powers, it's poised to eclipse the oil industry and become America's next engine of growth. Imagine the possibilities if monstrous forces could be harnessed as an energy source, or if new technologies could unlock superhuman abilities. Forward-thinking entrepreneurs and investors are already circling, eager to stake their claim in this promising new market. But there's a catch. These powers must be safe and controllable. Any mishap, like the current crisis caused by the experimental drug, would shatter those ambitions and wipe out every last investment. "We've made a colossal mistake," admitted the young, black-haired lieutenant general, his voice heavy with regret. He had originally opposed the decision to capture and study the creatures seized in Tokyo, and now he feared the true cost of that choice. Ethan had always believed that this level of supernatural power was far beyond America's current capabilities. In a field still in its infancy, such forces were unpredictable and prone to backfire. Time and again, he'd sounded the alarm to senior officials, only to be drowned out by political zealots intoxicated with the promise of otherworldly might. They saw in these powers a shortcut to cementing their authority or realizing their own grand designs. Half a world away, in Moscow, the Russian president's office lay deep within the Kremlin's ornate walls. Winter's silver sheen blanketed the city outside, but inside the presidential suite it was warm and hushed, as though the chamber itself held its breath. The commander-in-chief sat alone at a massive oak desk, his steely eyes fixed on the freshly delivered dossier before him. Under the soft lamplight, the embossed KGB emblem gleamed coldly. Once a symbol of ruthless efficiency, the agency had fallen on hard times in recent years, yet even now, faced with the lure of supernatural forces, it appeared ready to reclaim its former edge. Ethan watched the summary of the intelligence briefing scroll across the screen, his jaw set in steely resolve. The dossier detailed the sudden surge of demons and ghosts in Tokyo and the worldwide frenzy it had ignited around demonic force research. Every line warned of dire consequences: catastrophic damage to human physiology, irreversible harm to ecosystems, and above all, social upheaval and disasters born from powers no one could control. Each warning felt like a boulder landing on his chest. He frowned, tension rippling through him. For a moment, his fists clenched tightly, an unspoken dialogue between his fears and his ambitions. Then, slowly, reluctantly, he unclenched them. Ethan drew a deep breath. The faint, crisp scent of snow drifted through the open window, grounding him. As the nation's sovereign, every choice he made would shape his country's destiny and affect the lives of countless citizens. Impulsiveness was a luxury he could not afford. He leaned back in his chair, steeling himself. There would be no hasty decrees, no blind rush to exploit these forbidden powers. Instead, he would weigh every risk, consult every expert, and ensure that no threat, natural or supernatural, ever again caught his people unprepared. America has taught us a lesson. The commander's voice was low and magnetic, yet it rang with equal parts sarcasm and frustration. His words settled over the large, wood-paneled office like a heavy fog. Around him, a half-dozen officers and advisors sat rigidly in straight-backed chairs, some in crisply pressed military uniforms, others in dark suits and polished leather shoes. All watched him with serious, intent faces. For years, that nation has been well ahead of us in biotechnology, he continued, and yet they, too, have stumbled in their pursuit of demonic power. If they, armed with greater resources and talent, can't master this research without chaos erupting, what hope do we have? At our current technological level, delving into these unknown forces is no different than pulling hot coals from a blazing fire. He paused, sweeping the room with a steely gaze to make certain his point landed hard. Therefore, I've decided to shelve all ongoing projects into these mysterious creatures indefinitely. We cannot afford to follow in America's footsteps and invite turmoil into our own country. His declaration was like a boulder dropped into a still pond. The sudden tension hummed in the air as everyone digested what this meant. Months of classified research, locked labs, and military-industrial investments put on hold, perhaps forever. Eldridge, a slightly portly elder with a rounded belly and a bald head that gleamed like polished stone, rose deliberately to his feet. As one of Commander Mosca's most senior advisors, he cleared his throat before addressing the assembled officers. "Commander," Eldridge began, his tone respectful but firm, "I believe we should maintain a dedicated research team focused on the theoretical study of these mysterious creatures. At present, our technology isn't advanced enough to capture or analyze them directly. Yet by continuing to explore their fundamental nature, through mathematical models, historical records, and comparative anatomy, we'll build the solid foundation future breakthroughs will depend on. More importantly, sustaining this line of inquiry keeps us competitive in an uncharted field. We cannot afford to let temporary technological limitations let other nations surpass us." Commander Mosca studied Eldridge for a moment, weighing the proposal. At last, he inclined his head in assent. "Very well," he said. "Proceed with the theoretical research unit. Allocate the necessary resources, but ensure they operate within our current budget and security protocols." A relieved smile flickered across Eldridge's face as he sank back into his seat. With the Commander-in-Chief's approval secured, he felt confident their nation would remain at the forefront of this emerging frontier, ready to seize any opportunity the mysteries of these creatures might reveal. Bookbar proudly presents this novel. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished oaken table. "Regarding funding," he began, "I've noticed that many of the major industrialists have lately taken a keen interest in this mysterious field. They recognize its immense commercial potential and are more than willing to bankroll official research. If we secure their backing, we can accelerate our theoretical work and eventually move into practical experimentation." General Mosca nodded in approval. In these times, money and resources were everything. With sufficient capital, their research would progress by leaps and bounds. Ethan pressed on. "There's another opportunity. Our neighbors have been quietly eyeing our diamond mines. What if we invited them in as partners? By dividing the development costs, we'd relieve some of our financial burden, and they'd have a vested interest in supporting our research." General Mosca paused, brow furrowed in thought. After a long moment, he said, "Proceed, but be sure our interests and security come first." Ethan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Risky as it might be, the plan was sound, and with Mosca's blessing, they were one step closer to turning theory into reality. In an age fraught with unknown dangers, forging partnerships and securing mutual benefit are paramount. As long as one's own safety and interests remain protected, it's worth exploring cooperation wherever possible. With this principle in mind, Commander Mosca made his decision. All experimental work on the mysterious beast would be suspended, but the theoretical research team would stay intact. At the same time, they would begin seeking both new collaborators and fresh sources of funding to keep their studies alive. Chapter 1141, The Dudao Family's Surrender. Although their recent decision cost them the top spot in the martial arts world, it also spared them the fate that befell America. In an age rife with uncertainty and hidden dangers, stability and prudence are priceless. Half a world away, in Tokyo, Shinichiro Busujima moved with deliberate urgency. He had gathered the disciples from the dojo he'd established in America, crossed countless mountains and seas, and returned to a city that felt at once familiar and strangely new. Tokyo had weathered storm after storm and still stood proud, but now it was undergoing a transformation that drew all eyes. Word of his daughter Saiko's relationship with Ethan, once known as Luther, and of Ethan's display of near-divine power had reached him. Shinichiro understood that the emergence of such a force was reshaping the world's balance. America would no longer hold the center stage. The real epicenter was shifting to Tokyo's streets and skyscrapers. No sooner had he arrived than Shinichiro sought out Saiko. After a long, heartfelt conversation between father and daughter, he made one simple request. He wanted to meet Ethan in person. Ethan barely glanced at the request and, with a casual nod, granted it. In an instant, the legendary Busujima swordsmanship clan became vassals of the world's god. Word of this unprecedented alliance spread like wildfire throughout Tokyo, and soon the entire martial arts community was abuzz. Everywhere you turned, people whispered their envy of Busujima Shinichiro. His daughter, Saiko, was riding her family's newfound prestige straight toward the top. In an age when supernatural forces surged unchecked, anyone could see that forging ties to a divine being like Ethan was the surest way to reshape one's destiny. But the reality was more nuanced than the gossip mongers realized. Despite rampant speculation, Shinichiro had not been handed a secret cultivation manual brimming with raw spiritual power. Ethan's gift amounted to status and protection, not a direct infusion of ability. That subtle but crucial distinction was what Saiko explained to her father that very evening. Gathering in the traditional tea room of their estate, she spoke earnestly. "Father, spiritual power isn't something anyone can wield just by reading a book. It requires innate talent and the right disposition. A manual without the proper aptitude is nothing more than ink on paper." Shinichiro stroked his chin, nodding gravely. He understood now that their new alliance was a foundation, not a finish line. A powerful start, yes, but not the miracle everyone else assumed. And with Saiko by his side, he was determined to ensure that Busujima mastery would rise to meet its divine patron's expectations. The three sisters were chosen by Ethan because each of them possesses extraordinary spiritual potential. Shinichiro Busujima fell silent for a moment, then asked, "Aside from innate aptitude, is there any other way to awaken spiritual power?" Saiko Busujima's eyes darkened. "There is, though it's incredibly perilous. You confront demons or monsters in close quarters without firearms, only cold weapons. Under the crushing force of a demon's power, the human body can be driven beyond its limits, and sometimes that pressure will ignite latent spiritual energy." She paused, her tone calm but laden with gravity. This method wasn't handed down in a book or taught by a master. It was born in the age of gods, when ancient humans stumbled onto it through desperate struggles on the brink of death. Those who survived these trials became the very first spiritualists, and from them our entire tradition sprang. But make no mistake, it's a life-or-death gamble. Only a handful live through the ordeal, and far fewer emerge with their spiritual power awakened. "Father, what will you choose? Will you wait for the spirit power cultivation method Saiko might receive from Lord Ethan, or will you set out on this unknown and dangerous journey yourself?" At those words, Shinichiro Busujima's eyes ignited with determinate ion. As both a warrior and a father, he refused to hide behind his daughter's abilities or allow his family's honor to suffer. Rising to his full height, he spoke with the fierce calm of a master swordsman. "As a warrior, I have dedicated my life to the perfection of kendo. Life and death are simply parts of that path. Battling demons and monsters is a mortal struggle, yes, but it is also the truest test of a swordsman's spirit. He paused, glancing at Saiko with both pride and affection. I am proud to have such a daughter, but I cannot rely on her alone. This method may be perilous, but it is also a challenge befitting our kendo lineage. If we shrink from every trial, how will we secure our place in this new era? He reached out, gently taking Saiko's hand. Do not worry about me. I will face this trial myself. Shinichiro Busujima stood in the pale glow of the study lantern, his expression grave but determined. If we play this intelligence right, he said, voice low and measured, it could turn the tide of war and secure our family's future in this new era. Even as a bargaining chip, it's an asset beyond price. For the honor of the Busujima name and for the future of our land, I am ready to risk everything. Saiko Busujima bowed her head, a storm of emotions flickering across her face. She knew her father's decision was final. Fighting back tears, she forced her composure and spoke in a choked whisper. Father, may fortune favor you on the battlefield. I pray for your safe and triumphant return. Shinichiro inclined his head in acknowledgement, then turned and strode toward the door. In the moonlight, his tall frame looked both solitary and resolute. Saiko watched him go, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. She understood that this parting might be permanent, yet she took comfort in the knowledge that her father was guided by duty and by the glory he would bring to the Busujima family. Shinichiro Dokushima halted at the threshold of the great hall, his hand lingering on the carved oak door. He turned to face his daughter, Saiko, and offered a faint, reassuring smile. Saiko, he said quietly, I may not return from this journey. The fate of the Dokushima family rests on you now. Saiko met his gaze without wavering. Father, I understand. I won't fail you. Shinichiro's laugh rang out, equal parts joy and defiance. That's all I needed to hear. Even if I fall, I'll have no regrets. He pushed the door open and disappeared into the morning fog, leaving Saiko alone in the hushed grandeur of their ancestral home. Word of his departure spread like wildfire. From the Island Federation to the American government, every major power had been pressing the Dokushima clan for their secrets of spiritual cultivation. But Shinichiro had refused all offers, choosing instead to lead a handful of devoted disciples on a dangerous hunt beyond the family's borders. Now every eye in the world was fixed on Saiko. Her mission was clear: secure the divine blood of Ethan, the world's god. With it, the next generation of the Dokushima family would awaken their spiritual powers at birth, free from the life-or-death struggles that had defined their ancestors. Saiko closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her father's hopes and the expectations of an entire lineage. Then she squared her shoulders and stepped forward, ready to claim her family's destiny. The disciples were the Dushima clan's finest, young, fearless, and honed for battle. Yet when they came face to face with those savage creatures, they looked painfully small and powerless. Intelligence agencies on the island nation and in the United States were baffled. The Dushimas showed no trace of spiritual energy or superhuman ability, just ordinary people pushed to their limits through relentless training. As a result, on that very first day, hundreds of Dushima disciples fell, their lives cut short by feral claws and razor-sharp fangs.